The History Things podcast is brought to you by TR Historical, your one-stop shop for all your historical fan gear needs. Visit trhistorical.com and use the promo code HISTORYTHINGS to receive 10% off your next purchase. Thanks for listening. Now let's start the show.
Are you ready?
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the History Things podcast. I'm your host, Pat McGuire, and joining me today is my co-host with the most. You love him, you know him, park ranger, historian, and author. I changed the order that time. Got to keep you on your toes. Here's my main man, Matty B. How you doing, Matt Borders?
I'm doing good, buddy. It's always a pleasure to be here. Into episode 3 of season 2.
Yes. Is it me, or is this year both taking an incredibly long time and also moving incredibly quickly?
It's just the incredibly quickly part
Yeah.
for me. It is hauling butt.
You can say the A word, Matt.
Oh, I know.
You can say ass. But no, it is. This year is flying by. We just blinked, and it seems like we just sat down with Kobe Treadway and Jana to talk about the Lincoln assassination.
Right.
And, we got the better part of 10 hours of storytelling out of that subject, and I'm sure a lot of you are still listening to that right now. So when you get out of the Lincoln assassination story, we're going to be bringing you this epic Q3 story. Joining us today is one of our very, very good friends. He's a guy that Matt and I have known for years through living history and other cool historic endeavors and things like that. He's the one of the main rangers. We'll let him explain it himself at one of the most. I guess the way I say it is, it's the coolest historical site you've never heard of before. But joining us today is our very good friend, Rob Ambrose from Fort Frederick Historical Site. So how you doing, buddy? Welcome to the show.
Hey, Pat, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely.
I know this has sort of been a long time coming. We've been talking about this for, since before the world ended.
Yes.
And I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to get out and see human beings. So this is this is a lot of fun, especially some good friends like you guys.
How's it been, man? I know that you live out in the sticks out there in West Virginia, wild and wonderful. How's it been since? Because I saw you once during the initial lockdown. We swapped living history gear and did all that, but haven't seen too much of you, man. How's it been?
I have played things pretty close to vest, I guess you could say. I've stayed pretty low key. Took the the restrictions and all that stuff pretty seriously. Once I realized this wasn't going to last 3 weeks.
Yeah, exactly.
I remember the first 3 weeks of this at the park. We're wiping everything down. We're doing all this stuff, and you thought it was going to be over in a month, and it kept going.
Yep.
So we've stayed home. We've stayed, doing all the things you're supposed to do for the most part. Did follow some kids around the country doing sports during COVID, which is fun. That's an episode in itself.
Yes, I'm sure.
It is.
I'm sure.
So I've just been trying to trooper through at work. We've been open the whole time. People always ask, is the fort open again? Well, no, the park has been open. We've not shut down at all. I mean, our facilities, some of the buildings and stuff have been closed, but we've been there.
Right.
And we've been there to help people and answer questions as much as we could. So,
Well, I was wondering about that because the park has been open for most of the Park Service as well. Monocacy is the same story, but the facilities have been limited and
Right.
still are.
yeah, right now the only thing open in our park, are bathrooms.
Well, there you go.
This is the second time I've sat in the War Department studios and been the only non-park ranger.
It's all right.
Feeling very left out right now. You guys have all your cool, sticky park stuff to talk about and
Yeah, but
how you operate.
we're all living history nerds, though.
Yeah,
So.
well, I'm just gonna go over here and cry for a little while.
Yeah, no, I mean that's our connection, man. I'll never forget our first event together.
Oh, tell me
yeah.
about that one. Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Rob. Tell a story.
So went down to the Port Republic event a number of years ago now. I don't even remember. It was one of those sort of campaigner march events.
Was it the Hell March that got super hot?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was
I was there in blue.
It
Yeah.
was in June, and it was over 100 degrees and marching down pavement on Port Republic Road.
Yep.
Nope.
And God bless the people who are running it, trying to give us lots of breaks, but because they gave us so many breaks, I think it made it worse. Like,
oh yeah, people started to get like too like chilled out in between, and it just was bad. I fell out on that march. I caught a ride in a pickup truck. I'm no dummy.
Yep, I made it, but it was I don't know if it was worth it. And then of course we all got to camp and we're hanging out. We're all like, we don't want to cook. We don't want to do the campaigner thing right now. We're just spent.
Too hot.
Yeah.
Well, wait, Matt. Wait till you. This story is. Yeah.
So let's see. It was Pat and myself.
A couple other
guys.
jabronis.
Yeah.
We'll just say a couple jabronis.
Yeah, a couple other guys. And we said, we're going to go. I know a place nearby that serves food and has air conditioning. So yeah, we cheated. I'll admit.
I don't care.
I live in the 21st century. I like to play. Other times,
I like to do campaign living history, but I'll tell you what, I got a freaking day job that pays for all of that stuff, and I got to show up and do it. So if I'm dead from the weekend, what does that get me?
Right, and as ever since I put on the khaki and green, that's been more of my focus. It's like if I'm here till Sunday, and then I got to go back to work on Monday morning, I got to be functioning. And one time I wasn't. After we did the 150th of Manassas, my boss sent me home.
Wow.
He's like, you're done. Go home. I'd been at Manassas for almost a week, like 4 days or something, and I could barely stand up. And he's like, go home.
That was a brutal event.
So I kind of learned a lesson then to try not to overdo it. Plus, I'm not 16 anymore.
So I overdid it. Is the point of the story?
And Pat overdid it. So first, let's see. We stopped at a highway robbery lemonade stand on the way to the parking lot.
Oh, we did. Yeah, a bunch of like cute little girls had just realized that they're the only thing going on out here except for this reenactment. So they set themselves up between the parking area and the camp, and so all the people that were walking back and forth between were getting hustled out of money for lemonade.
Yeah, like I think it was like $1 a glass for like one of those little Dixie cups.
Dude, it was $2.50.
It was whatever it was. It was too much.
I was like, why are you making me change? Like, you're just as. They made a lot of money.
They did.
Not even gonna lie, they probably made a couple hundo.
Good for them.
We went and found this Italian restaurant that I knew about, and we had pizza. We met that guy from. What country was he from?
He's Sweden. He's Scandinavian. I'm bad. So he's from one of the Viking countries.
Okay.
I'll just say that.
And remember, he ordered that pizza with like everything on it.
Not just, it was like meat lovers and veggies and like Greek and Mexican. It was weird.
There was a lot of spice on it.
It was
That would have been a
weird.
difficult pizza to eat.
I mean, he housed it, dude.
Yeah, he did. So we ate. We enjoyed the cold beverages. We enjoyed the pizza. That one guy ended up buying our dinner for us from the Shenandoah Valley Battlefields or whatever.
Oh, you know what? I just realized what you're about to get to, and I think that actually happened before we ate.
Actually, I think you're right. I was telling this story.
I think I was just f***ed up from the heat at that point.
Yeah. So Pat had overdone it. Heat had gotten to him. It got to everybody. And he's right. I told the story wrong. We were getting out of the car, my minivan.
That's right.
My minivan.
Dude, calm down. Save some for the rest of us. Ladies, back off, all right? Rob's married. God.
Yeah. So we getting out of the minivan, and Pat slides the door open, and then
I lose it, dude. I lost every last bit of nothing that was already in my belly. Like, it was just foul. Like, I had said when we were getting in the van that, like, you know how, like, when you're, like, heat fried and then the air conditioning feels great, but then suddenly makes you nauseous because it's, like, too much cold? So, like, Rob cranks the AC.
You shacked your system.
100%. And so the only way to get out of where we were was, like, all these stupid-ass windy country roads. So I'm already like, oh, Jesus. And then right before we get into the parking lot of this place, it's like, hey, do you want to go over 3 huge-ass speed bumps? And Rob drives like me. He's like, screw it. Doof, 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 doof. Like, just hits him. And I was like, I think I passively said like 10 minutes before, like, I'm not feeling that great. And we were all just kind of zoning out because we're all heat zombies.
Right.
He hits these 3 things, and I, like, couldn't even tell him that I was about to get sick. And as soon as the door opened, I, like, barely made it out. I, like, around the back of his car, like, trying to hide it from these guys. And poor random people sitting in the car behind us because they got a front row seat of me just losing it. And you got to try to, like, I'm sorry if this is gross for all the listeners, but, like, you hadn't eaten. Mm-mm. Like, I'd had, like, 4 crackers, like, during the day, and, like, I think I ate an apple that somebody gave me while we were marching, and, like, a shit ton of water.
Right.
And oh my god, dude, it was so foul. But then I was instantly starving, so I got this massive pepperoni pizza, and I ate like almost all of it.
Yeah, we ate way too much. But for me, the point of the story is
Yeah.
for some odd reason that moment has bonded us together forever.
So anyway, so Rob, you are here to talk about a kind of cool, like, I guess we're going to do like an audio version of a living history program that you put on at your site, which I'll let you tell us about in a minute here. But this theme of tonight's going to be One Fort, Three Wars. So Rob obviously works at a historical fortification where, well, again, we'll let him talk to you about it. But we talk about three areas the most because we have
Three
some
eras.
favorites. What did I say?
Areas.
Did I say areas? That also works, doesn't it?
3 eras.
But doesn't areas? I mean, I didn't mean to say areas, but doesn't areas also work?
I suppose.
Yes.
Yeah. See, this is.
Three areas of interest.
Do you know
There
what this
you
guy
go.
did to me? I made Lincoln 6'5", and he was like, "Well, 6'4", and I was like, "Oh God, dick."
Gotta be accurate.
So Matt sounds like one of my children. I love you, boys.
Rob, you are. How do I describe what you do? I always just when I tell people casually, I'm like, he's like the main guy over at Fort Frederick. So, like, how do we professionally describe what you do at Fort Frederick Historical Site?
So
State Park, sorry.
Officially, my title is Park Ranger. Unofficially,
I love that catch-all.
yeah, it's Park Ranger. Unofficially, I would say. Oh, I'm trying to think of what the.
Mater D,
No, I was trying to think of the National Park Service equivalent.
Chief of Interp.
Sort of chief of interp. Like my boss is really the chief of interp, but I do the day-to-day. Like I run it hands-on.
Okay.
He's the guy I go to sometimes like, hey, can we do this? Like, does this sound good?
Nice.
He's assistant park manager, so I guess you could say I'm the chief of interp, whatever.
Yeah, because they'd be like intendants and deputy superintendent or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
So, you're
Right. So
Sounds
yeah.
like the chief to me.
Yeah, so I run the day-to-day operation of the interpretive program and set up any special events and all that stuff. So yeah, I mean, I hate using that word because I know that I'm still not quite the top of the pecking order.
That's all right.
But yeah, for sake of, because I used to say site manager, but in a lot of places site manager means
X, Y, or Z.
the whole
Right,
place.
you're running the show.
I'd like to say, well, I'm the manager of the historic site. But yeah, so chief of interp, I guess, would be the best way to describe me. But yes, I am a generalist park ranger. I do operations. I do interpretation. I do.
You've got a huge other duties as assigned.
Yes, I do. In what we do in the Maryland Park Service, we do everything but full blown law enforcement. So I have to enforce the rules, but I'm quote unquote a civilian.
So when it gets real hairy, you're like, "Don't make me call the real cops."
Exactly.
For real.
Exactly.
I will dial this quickly.
Although
I've
most,
got it on speed dial.
Yeah.
although most of the time they don't have a clue.
Do you think it'd be faster to speed dial 911 than to just dial 911? I feel like you'd actually waste more time being like, "Shit, what number is that?" Whatever.
But yeah, so basically run the interpretive program. So that's my main thing. But if you look at my job description, it is not. But yeah, it's
What
my,
if
one
we
of my big
dress
things.
up what your title is and just start calling you Garrison Commander because you have a fort
Oh.
and there would be a garrison there and you are in charge of it?
I like that.
Well, in terms of Fort Frederick, you call me governor.
Okay, governor. Oh,
I am the-
I like you, but that might
I
make
am
your
the
head
I
get
am
a little
the,
big.
I am the governor of the fort.
Oh wow! See,
That's the commander of the fort is the governor.
Do you think this room can handle all this ego already?
I think he's going to need a wig at the very least.
Damn.
That's one thing I don't have.
Is
I
the
keep
powdered wig?
contemplating getting a wig, and I have never done it.
Gotcha.
Because if you do it, you'll love it, and you'll also be embarrassed to show everybody because you won't shave your mustache.
No, I will. The mustache is coming off next week because I'm going into the fort doing interpretation, and
good for
we
you.
are officially maskless outdoors. So
Okay.
Yeah.
I will shave the mustache, and it will be gone until the end of the year or into the
You got
summer
a
anyway.
proud cookie duster, man. That's fantastic.
I do.
I would call that something else, but I also
yep.
love it.
But thank you.
This is a family rated show.
No,
we
I-
won't talk about it.
Yeah, we won't get into that. But
I'm doing a Caleb Brewster impression at your fort this year, right? I get to show up with my big beard, and I'm a whaler.
You do. You do look like Caleb Brewster from Turn, very
Not
much
a real
so.
person.
Do you have a whale of a tail? Or
I do.
two?
I once caught a fish this big.
Also, today before I came, I was watching the show New Amsterdam. Have you ever seen that?
No.
It's a medical drama.
Okay.
And if you wore cardigan sweaters and a tie, you could be this guy on there. His character's named Ziggy Frum. He's the psychologist, and he reminds me of you a little bit. He's like the. I know you say you're a nerd, but he's the nerdy you.
Oh, wow. There's another. Well, because Matt's nerdier than I am. So there's other levels
quite
of
a bit.
nerddom.
But he is. He's kind of built like you, and he might be a little taller.
Did you just call me
and-
fat?
No.
You son of a.
No, I like to say you're broad-shouldered.
I was just kidding.
He is
Damn.
Yeah, no, I mean,
I'm built like
but
a
yeah.
pit
So
bull.
if you ever look it up, you'll probably say I'm completely nuts. But today I saw that, I was like, he kind of reminds me of Pat.
Now I need to go get some sweaters and all that. It's because I'm very analytical. Obviously, I'm very psychological, said no one ever also. All right. So Fort Frederick, I obviously never heard of it until I met you. And I was obviously like an idiot. Like, I live in Frederick. Where in Frederick is it? And Frederick, Maryland, that is. And not in Frederick, Maryland. So first let's start with where it is. And then let's start with the roots of how the fort even comes into existence. So where is it? Like, if you are
And why is it?
If you are let's answer that a couple ways. So let's start with, if you are a modern day tourist and you want to go visit this site, where do you find it?
All right, Fort Frederick State Park is located in Big Pool, Maryland. We are about 20 miles west of Hagerstown, and the park is literally a mile off Interstate 70, exit 12, if you're looking for it.
Indian Springs, right?
Indian Springs Big Pool exit, that's right, exit 12. And so we are not in Frederick, and we are easy to find, but it's amazing how many people have either never heard of it or think it's ridiculously far away. And it's like, no, it's not really that far away.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's where we're located today, Big Pool, Maryland. You want the roots of Fort
When was it built and why was it built?
Yeah, so Fort Frederick was built in 1756, built by the colony of Maryland. Go into why it's unique a little bit. Fort Frederick is still around because it was built of stone, and it's one of its unique features. It's the only stone fort built by a British colony during the French and Indian War era, and as far as I know, and maybe one of your listeners can correct me because we've never been able to figure out otherwise, the only stone fort built actually by the British, period, colonist or royal funds in North America at the time.
Really?
Yes. So
And it's a big fort.
and some people might say throughout like Ticonderoga, originally built by the French.
Right.
Fort Clarion, same thing.
Right.
French.
Yeah.
I knew Ticonderoga. I didn't know that.
But it was my because I always think about it in the Rev War, being a British fort. But yeah, so as far as we can come up with, the only fully stone fortification built by British colony for sure, and by the British government period in North America in the 1750s.
That's a cool claim.
That's a great
That's
fact, yeah.
Yeah, I've known you for years. You just dropped that nugget on me right now?
I've been saving it for a rainy day.
Dude, this is a hell of a rainy day. Thanks for bringing it.
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons we exist, because the fort has been there. The walls have literally been standing for 260 plus years. I'm trying to think, where are we at now? 265-ish?
We're historians, everyone. We're not mathematicians.
Yes, exactly.
Give us a break.
With losing a year, basically I've lost track of my math. So
Sure.
yeah, if you've got the math skills or a calculator.
265 years ago. Ding, 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 ding.
Oh man, you can tell you've been there a while, because I figured that out without doing the math. So that's what's unique. That is our artifact, is literally the fort wall itself. Why was Fort Frederick built? I won't go into the beginning, but long story short, there is a war that starts in North America between the French and the English, because the French are in Canada and in Louisiana. The English are along the East Coast in colonies. The French want to connect their colonies in the Louisiana Territory with New France, or Canada today. And the important point of that is the forks of the Ohio River at what's now Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where the Ohio, the Allegheny, and Monongahela all come together. Well, the Monongahela and the Allegheny merge and make the Ohio River. So they're going north-south, and the English colonists are trying to head west. I mean, you think about it, even in the 1750s, you have some pretty big cities. New York, Boston, Charleston, theoretically, Annapolis is a pretty big place. Williamsburg, Virginia's more like a college town because it's only busy when it's capital time, when the capital's in session and William and Mary is in session. But there's some pretty big cities, and most of the people are crammed up against the coast. And we keep getting more and more English settlers, and they want to go west. They want more land.
Right.
So they're going west, and the French are going north-south, and it's kind of like coming to an intersection with no stop sign, and two cars show up at the same time. You're going to crash. And that's literally what happens in 1753, 1754, and 1755. In 53, Virginia sends George Washington to tell the French to get the heck out of the Ohio Territory, the Ohio country, which is now western PA, West Virginia, and even some in Ohio, Illinois area. He tells them to get out. They politely say, thanks, but no thanks, we're not leaving. Not long after that, the Virginians try to build a fort at the forks of the Ohio River called Fort Prince George. They have it almost completed. They're putting the doors on the fort, and the French show up. There's like 30 Virginians and like 300 Frenchmen show up. Needless to say, the Virginians go back to Williamsburg.
Nobody expects the French Inquisition.
So after that happens...
That joke doesn't work.
After that happens, in the spring of 1754, George Washington is sent with a group of Virginians, again, to try to take the forks of the Ohio. And he's also, what a lot of people don't realize, it's not just Virginians. There's actually royal troops under a Captain McKay. They are independent companies there, but these are royal troops that are with them too. So this makes an interesting situation. But Washington goes out, and he's going to go and find the French, and he's going to remove them from the forks. In the meantime, he gets engaged in a little battle at a place called today Jumonville Glen.
Mm-hmm. Nasty little fight.
He is led there by his Indian ally by the name of the Half King, and it ends up basically, I don't know who fires the first shot, but it basically becomes a massacre, an ambush. The Virginians basically kill the majority of the Frenchmen that are there. One escapes. They take some prisoners. But the big thing that happens is that the Half King comes up to Lieutenant Jumonville, or Jumonville, English pronunciation, French pronunciation,
Yes.
whichever. And basically raises up his hatchet and looks at him and says, "You are not yet dead, my white father," and plunges his hatchet into the guy's skull.
Wow.
This is a very political move on his part. He is literally telling the French, "You were still alive," but he then kills him. "You are now dead. I am now with the English. We aren't with you anymore." Washington goes back to what's known as the Great Meadow. He builds a fort of necessity, a little wooden stockade fort in the middle of this field. As he calls it, a charming field for an encounter. Needless to say, the French come after him.
Duh.
I believe it's July 3rd, 1754. Big, long battle takes place. It's pouring down rain. Unfortunately, the French won't come out and fight a European battle like Washington wants. They stay up sort of in the little low hills around him, and they're just shooting down the English like dogs, left, right, and center. So finally, the French send him terms for surrender. Washington's translator is a Dutchman by the name of Van Braun. I don't know if he's related to Werner
I was
von Braun.
literally going to
I don't
ask
know.
you.
I don't know that. I should look that up just because that's a curiosity question. Von Braun isn't a very good French reader or speaker. So they've got this rain-soaked, water-soaked document that's splattered, and somehow they miss a very important line that says basically that Washington was l'assassin of Lieutenant Jumonville. I don't speak French, but I know what the word assassin means.
I know what lay means. So together we are confirming it means the assassin.
The assassin, yes, correct.
God, historical investigation just took place live on the History Things podcast. You are all welcome.
So Washington surrenders, doesn't know what he signed. The French published this, and, imagine the headline on the news the next day. Virginia militia colonel admits he murdered French officer. It's
Sacre bleu.
sacre bleu.
Did he really just straight? He's like, I did it.
He didn't realize.
He didn't realize he
was-
did it.
Yeah.
He's 22 also. He's probably going through a little shock after watching what just happened and being in the battle, having all these casualties.
That escalated quickly.
Yeah. And I also like to remind people, most people, what were you doing when you were 22? Were you leading an army? even a small one? Yeah. So he's got a lot of room for growing up. So the French, of course, capitalized on this, and that really starts the French and Indian War in North America. I mean, this war will become truly the First World War, and it starts here. There's been other wars that have happened between the French and the English that have spilled over into our continent, but this one starts here. This will then lead into the 7 Years' War.
Right.
That's the global conflict that touches every continent on the planet. So,
Arguably the first World War.
yes, arguably the First World War. Not to be confused with the redo.
Yeah, no.
In
I
1914.
mean, I just because we talk about this another time in history, because the Crimea is often called World War Zero.
Right.
But
Right.
but I mean, like, so what is this, World War -1?
Well, and I'm sure you could look at some of the other
Yeah, we're getting
other
there.
conflicts, even in the 18th century, that there's fighting on several different continents.
Sure.
But this one, I mean, literally, there's fighting in India, and there's fighting in the Caribbean,
And
there's
they're all
fighting-
interconnected.
Yeah,
It's not, I'm not just meaning this happenstance fighting. Like, this is interconnected conflict.
right.
So
So then in 1755, sorry, I said this wasn't going to take long, but it's there's a lot to unpack.
unpack it. Show me your luggage. No, don't.
The British send a new commander to North America named Edward Braddock. Mm-hmm. And Edward Braddock has 2 understrength regiments of British regulars, and they team up with the Virginians, as well as a company of Marylanders, some North Carolinians. There's a kind of a ragtag, motley force of troops, but it's a roughly 2,000 man army.
It's a sizable force.
It's the largest army ever seen in North America at that time. It's the largest force in North America at that time. He's got cannons, lots of artillery, and he decides that he is going to build a road. Basically, he's going to march roughly from Winchester, Virginia, to what's now Pittsburgh. He's going to cut a road from Cumberland, Maryland. So there's a fort there, Fort Mount Pleasant, which becomes Fort Cumberland.
Hold on, we got to stop for a second, because there are people in the county that I grew up in that are having a stroke that you said he starts that whole story from Winchester, because there is a huge marker in downtown Bethesda, Maryland, where when he first gets to the colony, he's got an encampment in Bethesda, Maryland, and when he sets out for Winchester, it's from there. Sorry, county. Got to shout out the county I grew up in. We have a historical marker for this.
All right, that was a rabbit hole I wasn't going to go down, but okay, let's go there.
Do it.
Well done.
I didn't really know about the Bethesda one. I will
Yeah.
admit that, but he actually shows up in Alexandria, Virginia, and he does sort of move around a little bit. He has a meeting in.
Doesn't he come up through here? He's
He
got
does.
a marker
Yep.
like on 40.
Well, and that's another thing. There at one point there are 2 columns, one that goes through Maryland and one that goes through Virginia, and they all meet at Winchester. So if you're in Frederick County, Maryland, and you go down Braddock Road,
Yep.
you go over Braddock Mountain, all of that is connected to that campaign. That is actually Braddock's guys. Colonel Dunbar, as the other part of his troops, are in Virginia, but they all basically merge together at Winchester, and from Winchester go to Cumberland. And then from Cumberland's where the real campaign begins, because they have to start building the road from there.
Right.
But yes, in Alexandria, there's anywhere you go in the DMV area,
if Braddock was there,
if
he's
it
got a
says
sign.
Braddock Road, Braddock whatever, it's General Edward Braddock. Braddock Street in Winchester.
Did Braddock come with the column into Maryland? Because I seen that sign on Braddock Heights seems to sort of imply that he's with this column.
Yes. I did misspook.
Misspook.
I did misspeak.
Misspook.
He is in on the Maryland side. Another problem that people don't realize is they think that he went straight through Maryland.
No.
Right.
He goes basically over South Mountain, down through more or less what's Hagerstown, which really didn't exist then.
Well,
He
a
goes
chunk of it slips right over the northern edge of what becomes Antietam National Battlefield.
correct, and then he crosses his troops at what's now Williamsport.
Right.
It was known as Conococheague back then, and actually in Williamsport he meets with several governors and then Benjamin Franklin on the march.
Hey, Matt, this is the guy that taught me how to say that correctly. Conakajig.
Ah, there you go.
Remember, it was like in our first season.
I thought about that as I drove over the big Conakajig Creek Bridge today. I thought about that.
Yeah.
I can say that word.
You're the man, Rob. Thank you
Thank you.
very much, because I pull that out literally never, but I got to once. I impressed Matt.
You did, and I was shocked. I'm listening to your podcast. I was out walking, and all of a sudden it was like, shout out. I was like, whoa, where'd that come from?
Because you taught me how to say Conakajig. Because everybody says Conakajig. No, it's Conakajig.
Yeah.
Get it right.
So basically he does. He comes through Maryland. Some of the forces come through Virginia. They land at Alexandria, go west. So they leave from Winchester, go to Cumberland. They're Cumberland for a while, and then they literally start cutting a road, which is roughly Route 40 today from Cumberland, Maryland, west. It takes a while, especially the first 10 miles of the road. It's ridiculous how long it takes him. So, but he makes his march, and he's moving along, and finally, a young guy by the name of George Washington, there he is again.
Yeah, we've dropped his name. He's familiar to me for some reason.
Yeah.
Keeps coming up.
He becomes his
Yeah.
Braddock's aide de camp, and he comes up, supposedly, it's him that comes up with the suggestion that you got this 2,000-man army, and it's really slow. You got wagons and stuff. Why don't you split your forces and take a lightning column or a strike force, whatever you want to call it, with a few cannon and your best troops, and hit the road hard and let the guys with the heavy artillery and the wagons and the women and all that stuff,
And the women.
the laundresses
followers.
and the laundresses and nurses,
I'm just being an idiot.
as most people are when we say women in this 18th century. It's a
You're-
huge
it's a
misconception.
good clarification to make, for sure.
Huge misconception. They are women of the army, followers of the army. They are part of the force. They are subject to discipline.
Yeah, they do work for the army.
They have
like,
to be
Matt's-
virtuous.
Right,
Right.
Matt said, they're laundresses. They do things.
Yeah. So they split their force not far from the Great Meadow where Fort Necessity is. And Braddock goes on with this column, and they get within a few miles of Fort Duquesne. They're making it. They cross the Monongahela twice, and not long after the second crossing, the two forces, the French, you now know they're there, and the English basically collide into each other. It's not an ambush. It's literally like you're looking at your phone and somebody else is looking at their phone, and you bump into each other. And then all hell breaks loose.
And this is the first Battle of the Wilderness,
This is
as
the
opposed to 1864.
Yes, the first Battle of the Wilderness, the Battle of Monongahela, or Braddock's defeat, takes place. It's a 3-hour battle.
Takes place same day as Monocacy. It's July 9th.
Oh, there you go.
Yes,
It's
yes.
July 9th, 1755.
Correct.
July 9th, 1864. And
Slight difference.
this battle is also similar to how Gettysburg sort of flares up, right? Like, everybody kind of knows they're in the area, but, then they kind of bump into each other and engage, and it's all of a sudden, they're bringing up all the columns. There's 7 columns of Federal infantry, and and Heath's all pissed, and shit happens.
You
And
think they
Martin
said-
Sheen is there.
You think they said dur-dur-dur?
Yeah, that's exactly how they were like, we need to speed up time, so
Yeah, no, I don't. It was, similar. Definitely the initial contact, because the French almost lost the battle initially.
Don't you remember Martin Sheen said, there is no time, God. The French lost the battle.
No,
No, I know they did.
no,
They-
the French don't lose the battle
they
at all.
whoop some ass here.
They end up basically hitting the English in kind of in a frontal attack, and then coming up around the hills on the sides, the horns of the bull formation that people talk about sometimes, like with the Zulu Wars kind of thing, and
Double envelopment.
Double- That's what I was
yes,
thinking.
thank you, double envelopment. That would
thinking
be the
Hugh
term.
Mercer. I was like, why? Yeah.
So that's what they do, and roughly 900 of the 1,000 men become casualties, wounded, killed, missing.
George among them? God, his name's familiar. What is it? If I had a buck every time he sounded familiar to me.
No. So
There's
Washington,
my first groan.
Washington, I think, has a horse or two shot out from under him. He has, I think, at least 7 bullet holes in his clothing, but he's never touched. And there's even an Indian account he says, we shot at him. We literally aimed at this guy, and our bullets just missed.
Was he the original Benjamin Martin?
God.
Oh, dude, it's on tonight. Just get ready. Pull up. Put on your comfy slippers, Matt. This one's going to be a ride.
So they lose big time.
They don't hit George Washington.
They do not hit. They do
about.
not hit George Washington. The English lose the battle. They retreat. Edward Braddock is severely wounded, mortally. He ends up dying on the retreat. They end up burying him in the middle of the road.
I was going to ask you to confirm or deny that story.
That is true.
Okay.
So they bury him in the middle of the road so that the American Indian warriors can't desecrate his body.
Right.
So they bury him in the road, and people are like, what? Why? So they bury him in the road, and then the army literally marches. So now the 1,000 men plus wounded that are left march over his body to obliterate any trace that he was buried there.
So we, to this day, don't know where his body is?
They found his body when they were building the National Road in the 1830s, 1840s, and then they moved the remains underneath. There's a monument to him.
There's a big monument
Yeah.
to him.
But he's still buried here, like
He
in
is
the
still,
States.
yes, he is buried under his monument right up the road from Fort Necessity National Battlefield. It is part of the Fort Necessity Battlefield Park. There is a section of the original National Road, and the spot where they found him, it's all marked out. It's an eerie and kind of cool little place to go.
That's cool.
If you're ever out in the Uniontown, Pennsylvania area to see Fort Necessity, Jumonville Glen, and Braddock's grave. And I got to admit, in terms of battlefields I've been to and gives me the
Willies.
willies, I
heebie-jeebies?
guess, Jumonville Glen to me looks like, at least the way I imagine it looked the day it happened.
That's awesome.
The engagement there, like there you can still feel it, which is cool. Because
Champion Hill at Vicksburg did that for me. When you get there and you can still see the
Understandable.
the alienness of the ground, and like you can see the trenches, the craters. Just I stood there and I was like, I have never. That's why that's why we talk about going to the Western Front all the time. Like I want to see Verdun just because. Like that's a place where you could look at it and still see it. So that's awesome. So that's was this the Fort Necessity site you're talking about?
yeah, Fort Necessity, yeah, Jumonville Glen. It's a little bit of a hike even from the actual Fort Necessity site, but it's worth the little hike if you can in your car because you got to drive there. You can't really literally hike
Don't
to
literally
it.
hike.
Once you get there, you have to hike to the site. The parking area is so you get away from everything when you get
that's
there, which is
awesome.
cool. So Braddock's defeat happens. It's bad. I mean, real bad. Colonel Dunbar, who was his second in command, holds a council of war at Cumberland and decides that August is a good time to go to Philadelphia and set up winter quarters.
Yeah, totally. Super
So-
cold soon in 3-4 months.
But he's still got to get there.
I get that, but that's a lot of summer ahead of you still in
Yeah.
August.
It probably
This is the Mid-Atlantic, guys. It's probably 60 degrees in Thanksgiving time.
Right. So he retreats and goes to set up winter quarters in Philadelphia, and that leaves the frontiers of Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia undefended. There's nobody except for there's one company of about 50 Marylanders. Pennsylvania has these loose associations of militia that they don't have because it's a Quaker colony. They don't have an official militia or provincial force. And Virginia has their companies, but it's, I'm trying to think, it might be 5 companies at that point. But they've got to defend, in their minds anyways, from Cumberland, Maryland, to at least northern North Carolina, like the Carolina border with southern Virginia.
So just like a small, if you were a cop, this is a small beat, is what you're describing, right? Like just a small, like a block or two. I mean, we're talking several hundreds of miles here, guys.
Yeah.
So how many guys are we talking to run this show?
He has there's probably 500 to 1,000 men.
Strung out over what are we going to say, like 400?
Probably
450 miles,
Yeah.
500 miles?
Yeah.
Holy moly.
Good luck.
Maryland, not so bad.
Right.
Their borders a little more narrow and confined
Yeah.
because of those other big colonies that have compressed it.
Hey, listen, we're a Maryland-based show here, so if you're, in the bordering Commonwealths, just know that you're second. We're first, okay? Get out of here, jerks.
Yeah, when I tell the French Indian War story, I have mixed emotions as someone born in Virginia and a native West Virginian, part of the Commonwealth originally. I always struggle sometimes that I have to say things bluntly about Virginia.
You also act like a Marylander. You're like a hybrid of all the places you exist.
I am.
You sound like a Marylander.
I do.
You've said "oh" a few times on this show. The Yankee fan of me is dying.
Well, my mom was born and raised in suburban DC in Maryland,
Right.
so I do have some Maryland ties.
Yeah, you got him.
So they've got to figure out how to defend this frontier, and we'll now narrow back into Maryland. Governor Horatio Sharp, who was the colonial governor of Maryland at the time, is a former, I don't know if you can say former, a retired maybe British military officer, and has seen some service, and he gets it. Like, he gets defense. He gets what needs to be done. The problem is that he has to deal with the Maryland State House.
Politics.
It's not a dictatorship. It's a landed gentry democracy. That's what we'll call it.
That was very diplomatic, by the way.
It is. And I will tell you, reading these arguments and debates and political stuff from the 1750s, which you can find all online from the Maryland archives, you change, for the most part, the names and the dates, and the arguments haven't changed.
Oh, sure.
The debates in politics have not changed. Conservatives versus liberals, and I wouldn't even call them liberals back then, but kind of that debate, the guys are like, yeah, we should spend the money, and the guys are like, no, we shouldn't spend the money.
Right.
And when it comes to defense, the people who are, say, Baltimore West are a little more into the idea of, the French and the Indians could attack us.
Well, yeah, because it's more relevant to them. You're in the danger zone. Cue the Kenny Loggins. Highway.
But the
Danger zone.
the elites in southern Maryland, along the Chesapeake Bay, particularly the eastern shore, they're not invested.
Right, they're holding it down out there. They have no real danger. The English aren't coming for them. They are the English.
Yeah, I mean, like if somebody said we should
That happens later.
put cannons on the coast, they'd have probably been, oh yeah, that's a good idea, because it would be their area. But because it's out west, they don't care.
Yeah.
So the governor knows he needs to do something. So he actually puts some money forward from a lottery or subscriptions or sort of like a bond issue today kind of situation where you're getting money from people to fund some defense. So Maryland, like I said, has raised one company under John Dagworthy already. He gets another group of men, 20 men under Thomas Stoddart, and gets money for them to go out to what's today Hancock, Maryland, and build a small stockade fort in July and August of 1755 after Braddock's defeat. And they built a small stockade fort known today either as Stoddart's Fort or Fort Tenalloway, because it was on the Tenalloway Creek. And so their job, him and his 20 guys, are to defend the frontier too. So you've got him there. Dagworthy's usually at Cumberland trying to hold things down there because there's a pretty big fort and supply base there, along with work with Virginia. Somewhat successfully, somewhat not. Virginia and Maryland have a very interesting relationship in the 1750s. They can work together for a minute, and then they can't.
So just like right now, to further prove your point, because that's exactly how Maryland acts with Virginia now. Sometimes with BFFs, sometimes we're like, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah, exactly. There are moments that they can work together. Hey, we need this. One colony gives something to the other, and then other times, it's like each man for himself.
Yeah.
So there's no unified, system in the colonies. So he has this small fort. Things are not good. There are tons of attacks in the frontier areas along the border of Pennsylvania and Maryland and Virginia. Raids are happening. So he knows he needs a bigger fort, and he wants to build a fort literally between Fort Cumberland and Fort Tenalloway. He wants to build a really big fort, and he actually even thinks about getting Virginia involved with it. A regional approach. Well, needless to say, the Maryland Assembly is not going to work with Virginia. And there was another problem was they didn't want to fund a fort. Maryland didn't want to fund a fort that might not end up in their colony when the borders are finally settled, because the borders aren't settled. Mason and Dixon haven't come along yet and made the lines. So they really are shooting that down, and there's a lot of back and forth. The upper house, the assembly, doesn't want to spend the money. The lower house does. The lower house is popularly elected. The upper house is sort of the
House of Lords.
the House of Lords kind of situation, and they just do not want to do this. Finally, almost a year later from Braddock's defeat, by May of 1756. After much fighting and arguing, and it's a whole long convoluted story, he gets 11,000 pounds for defense. The one big caveat is he is not going to get to put his fort where he wanted to put it. He wants to put it near present-day Old Town, Maryland, at the confluence of the South Branch of the Potomac and the Potomac River. So we'd have Cumberland, then he would have his new fort, then he'd have Tenalloway, and then he wanted to build some more smaller forts going back east. And forts needed to be 12 to 20 miles apart because you need to be able to communicate, as they called them in the communication, be able to move from one to the other within a day.
Right.
So he wanted to build all these forts. It didn't happen. So finally, and there's basically the argument that they gave was even Fort Tenalloway, or Stoddard's fort, they said, the Maryland Assembly literally says, it's 5 miles beyond our inhabitations. So they're like, no, we're not going to let you build anything west of that. And they find this property at North Mountain, off of North Mountain, Fairview Mountain today. And they purchase the land and they build this fort. And they start construction in June of 1756. And another one of the trade-offs is that he had to abandon Fort Tenalloway as well, because they weren't going to fund 2 forts. Yeah, they don't also want to send troops to Cumberland either. They're like, no, we're not paying for troops to go to Cumberland. And that's a whole nother long, interesting...
They're going to give him one big fort.
One big fort.
And that's it.
And he is going to build it of stone. Maryland Assembly is not happy about that.
More expensive.
Exactly. And right after he gets the money, a fort in Pennsylvania named Granville is burned to the ground, stockade fort. And he says, see, guys, this is why we're going to build mine of stone. You can huff and puff, but you won't blow my house down.
Solid. Three Little Pigs reference. I love it.
So that he, and this is the other thing that I think is really cool about Governor Sharp. Not only is he a military man, and because he's a military man, he literally, this is the governor of the colony. Imagine Governor Hogan doing this. We're gonna do a public works project, and I'm going to actually oversee it. So Governor Sharp leaves Annapolis and goes out to the fort at North Mountain, is what he calls it initially, and is there for like 3 or 4 weeks overseeing construction of this fort.
Wow.
He says that basically there's no one in the colony who knows how to build a fort but me. I mean,
That's
loosely
bold.
translated, that's what he says. He says the men and officers are all raw and ignorant of anything military or military construction or something along those lines. And it's been translated over the years kind of incorrectly. People have said, oh, no, he means they're stupid people. It's like, no, he means that they don't know how to build a European fort.
In America.
In America.
America. No, I was thinking that as you said that because I'm a big believer. If you want something done right, you got to do it yourself. And there's probably some of that involved here. He's like, look,
Sure.
You guys aren't getting it. I'm not being critical of you, but this has got to get done, and I know how to do it. So I'm going to do it. Because obviously he's from Texas. That's why he talks like that.
Texas, England, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It's a, yeehaw, mate.
It's way...
It's one of those lesser-known
It's
shires.
way southern England.
Oh, it's way southern England.
Yeah. So he goes out to oversee this, and he is a man of action. He goes out to the frontiers many times. He goes out earlier in 1754. He's going to go out and see that construction, and he's going to go out to the frontiers a couple more times later, because there's several times it kind of like, so we have a disaster. Let's say there's a tornado goes through some part of the state, and the governor shows up, right, to make people feel good.
Sure,
and he does this on a couple occasions, but he doesn't just go out and make them feel good. He literally takes command of the militia. Like, he'll go out and he'll go out with the county militia. He's like, I'm in charge.
It's his prerogative.
And it's his prerogative. And if you ever see the portrait of the man, he is in military uniform. He's a military man. Mm-hmm. He even tries at one point, he gets so frustrated in Maryland Assembly, he writes his brother and says, I want to go back in the military. Can you get me a new commission?
Wow.
But I won't accept anything less than full colonel.
By the way, I don't just want to go back into the military. I want some sick-ass rank and some power.
And so we
with
know,
something with teeth.
Yeah, we think he was a captain or a lieutenant colonel, although I have seen a reference somewhere that said something about him being a general previously. But his records are very sketchy. Mm. He may have served in 2 different units, a Marine unit and an Army unit. He may have served in India. So he was possibly well-traveled.
Is he Jason Bourne? He may have done all these things, but I can't confirm it because he'll kill you.
Yeah, it's hard. So he gets them to come out. He builds this fort. He's got 11,000 pounds for defense. 6,000 of it is literally to build the fort and everything that goes along with that. So Fort Frederick has got about an 18-foot tall stone wall. It's about 3 feet thick. There's an acre and a half of land inside of the fort. For any French and Indian War people out there, Fort Frederick is big enough that most French and Indian War forts would fit inside its parade field.
Wow.
That's a great description.
George Washington's Fort Necessity, you could put 9 of them between our barracks.
Wait, what?
9, yeah. Nine
God, I knew it was
necessities.
small, but geez.
Yeah,
That's incredible.
yeah. Our barracks are 120 feet long. Fort Cumberland was 120 feet long. So again, that gives you, and there's a relatively big fort. So yeah, it's a huge undertaking. And if it was completed correctly, not only is it 3 foot thick walls, it's got about 16 feet of dirt behind the stone wall and then a log wall behind that. So now you're talking a 20-foot thick wall.
Yeah, you're not breaching that going through it.
Right.
You better have some grappling hooks. You're going over the top.
You're going to have to go over the top, and you're going to have to face, hopefully if it's fully garrisoned, roughly 200 muskets and 4 cannon.
That's right.
1 cannon, 6-pound cannon in each bastion, meaning it fires a 6-pound iron ball that has a range of a half a mile. So
You're going to look like Carrie Ells in Glory when you get to the top of that parapet. You are dead.
Good reference.
good reference, yeah,
Yeah.
very good.
You're dead. Like, oh, the best part of that is the music. They're swelling. They're taking the fort, and then
Boom.
canister.
Yeah.
Fire.
Yeah, and there's only one entrance into the fort. Most forts of that era have 2 entrances, so you really have to breach one.
Is there no Sally Port on
There's
Fort Frederick?
no sally port on Fort Frederick.
Really?
Yes, no sally
Just the
port.
main gate.
Just the main gate, which had a wicket, the smaller door for allowing individuals in.
That also works against the defenders, though, because if they do get truly sieged, like there's one way in, one way out.
It does, and unfortunately, we don't know why. Like, there's no reference to anything saying why there's not a sally gate. Also, though, the sally gate theoretically would be on the land side of the fort, the way the fort's set up, and the land side is where you expect your attack to come from, so you don't want a weak point.
No, right.
That sounds
And
reasonable.
and the southern exposure of the fort where the gate is towards the river, which again, in theory, you wouldn't have an attacking force coming from. I mean, you could, but you'd have a bunch of guys in canoes or something. It'd be pretty easy to
Exposed.
see.
Also, without going down the rabbit hole, that also makes me think that Helm's Deep is a dumbass build because everything is channeled into one direction, and of course you have that stupid little drain they breach and blow up. So like,
Talk
this
to
is
Avery about
bad
about
fortification
Helm's Deep.
building. Jesus,
I mean, everybody's got an Achilles heel. You know, I'm sure there was something.
especially Achilles.
Yeah,
God,
yeah.
literally.
The one thing that Fort Frederick has going for it, because there's some great debate over how much of the interior defenses were finished. And part of that will lead, part of that becomes a part of the next, we'll talk about a little more in the next part of the story.
Sure.
But if the walls weren't done in typical Vauban style, which means it's a star fort, and Fort Frederick is one of the simplest versions. It's only got 4 points. It's not a 5-point. It doesn't have some of the horn works and outer works of places like Fort McHenry or something, if
Right.
you've seen an aerial of that.
My,
It's the same.
my fort nerd is going off right now. I'm loving this.
Yeah, so it doesn't have a lot of that stuff, at least as far as we know. So, but even if the wall's only 3 feet thick, Fort Frederick is about 40 miles west of Frederick, Maryland, and we are, 120 miles, modern highway miles from Pittsburgh, from Fort Duquesne?
Yep.
That's a long way to go, and the French never had the numbers of troops that the English had. So imagine the French trying to bring a siege army over
Right.
to get Fort Frederick. First, they'd have to go through several probably other forts like Cumberland or whatever, although Cumberland would have fallen pretty quickly. If anybody loves Fort Cumberland, I'm sorry.
Don't apologize. Facts are facts. If your fort
Governor
wouldn't have
Sharp
handled
says it
wouldn't have
wasn't,
handled
he said it wasn't worth the name fort.
it. Wow.
Basically because it's commanded by hills around it.
Tell us how you really feel, Governor
Yeah.
Sharp.
He was,
Jeez.
he's a cool guy. He's a cool guy. He really is. I wish somebody in the modern era of history would write about him. Actually, now I say that, shout out to my friend Tim Ware. He's going to be working on a book about him. So,
Is he?
Oh,
So-
I was hoping you were going to say, oh, maybe I am.
No. I just sort of had that brain moment. He's researching and got a deal to do a book.
Awesome.
So,
Congratulations
that's cool.
to him.
Yeah. So that's cool. So we might have a good, no, I shouldn't say might be. We will have a good book on Governor Sharp since Lady Edgar. That's
Sweet.
the last person that wrote about him in like the early 20th century.
Wow.
Thanks, Lady Edgar.
Yeah. And we get some good stuff from her, but it's not cited or anything. It's,
Of course.
you wonder sometimes. So Fort Duquesne being 120 miles away, when the French and their Indian allies would go out on raiding parties, they might start out as a group of, say, 100 guys. And I'm just using that number, but think of that as a big number, 100 guys. But they would go so far out, and then they would split into a group of 50. And then a little further east, they split to 25. Because the further east they go, the closer they get to settlements, the bigger the group, the easier they are to spot, the easier they are to find. So the smaller the groups, because what do we think of when we think of the French and Indian War? Like when it comes to what the French and the Indians are doing, like where are they attacking?
England.
Well, Pennsylvania. and
Dude, I was
whatnot.
kidding.
True. Definitely hitting.
I know
the
you were
frontier.
looking for a real answer,
No.
and
Well, we'll get that in post-production.
Yeah.
So,
I'm
but,
believing it.
but these groups would get smaller because they would get detected. And so when we think about, you read about a lot of the attacks and raids, they are going after what we would call today in the era of terrorism, soft targets.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And a soft target in 1750 is the
farmstead.
McGuire farmstead.
Yeah. Don't attack my farm. It's not a soft target. You have no idea how booby-trapped this place is.
You've got one shot, dude.
You storm this castle, you're about to meet your maker. Say your prayers.
And that's what a lot of those guys and their families thought out on the frontier when they decided not to go hang out at a fort with their friends. Oh, yeah, I got this. And then it's funny because they'd go and the people at the little wooden fort would look out the distance and see the McGuire homestead, big black plume of smoke
I'm
coming
feeling
up.
attacked right now. I'm going to go rob the Ambrose farmstead.
Oh,
I'll
whatever.
be back. Matt, you got the show.
So they're hitting targets of opportunity, soft targets, individuals out and about, small farms, because they're not big groups.
Right.
And the French and their Indian allies, again, they're not going to stand and fight against a fort. When they even if they had 50 guys, and they showed up at Fort Frederick with muskets and potentially bows and arrows, and there's a 3-foot thick stone wall, are they going to be super successful if there's 200 troops and 4 cannon?
Come
No,
get
no.
some.
Now,
Oi, you got a little bow and arrow there?
now
I'm just going to sit inside this fort while you act like a jackass.
I will tell you, and kind of, I guess maybe skipping ahead a little bit, the French and Indians do, on occasion, raid at Fort Frederick,
All right.
but they never attack it directly. It never is attacked. It does its job. But in 1757, particularly, there are several instances where a guard is shot at. There are people guarding the front gate, and I can show you where I think the musket ball hit the wall to this day.
Oh, yeah. I want to see that.
Yeah, which is kind of neat.
Every time I go to this fort or you talk about this fort, I learn something new about it. Like, I'd known you for like 3 years, and you're like, by the way, in the Civil War, they fired a cannon out of a hole in the wall here. I was like, 3 years into our friendship, you teach me this?
Hey, we got a long story. We got 3 centuries of history.
This is dope. Let's go.
So we know we have a guard shot at. We have civilians killed near the fort. We have a soldier has a horse shot out from under him trying to take a message to Carlisle within a half a mile of the fort. So there's a lot of activity. It's not safe. I like to think of, if anybody's familiar with the Iraq War, we got to Baghdad and we created the green zone, which was the safe zone. That's what Fort Frederick is. It's a safe zone for the troops. But you go outside of the gate, it's not quite so safe.
Right.
At least potentially. So, but it is never directly attacked because there's no major forces coming to attack Fort Frederick. So, back a little bit more about the fort itself. It's not only has it got this unique, awesome stone wall, it had 3 big buildings inside the fort, which were very different than most frontier forts. You have 2 enlisted men's barracks. If you have ever seen a Western cavalry movie, you've ever seen a fort with barracks and it's 2-story and got porches and stuff like that, that's what Fort Frederick is. We've got these 2 big 2-story white clapboard siding barracks with porches and nice windows and everything. And with glass in them. It's very even some brickwork on the brick guttering and stuff that's not typically done at a slapped up soldier built frontier fort. Fort Frederick is built by experienced, quality, maybe not quality, I'm assuming quality, craftspeople.
This is like a military installation.
Correct.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, not to like, they're
meant to
kind of
stick
the same
around.
thing, but yeah, this is built to be here for a while.
It is meant to be built for a while. It is a, again, using sort of a modern term, it's a FOB. It's a forward operating base.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it's for. And so this fort is built by carpenters and miners who are digging the footer for the wall. The wall doesn't just stop at the dirt that you see today. It goes under the ground several feet.
Right.
There's, like I said, carpenters, miners, masons. There's all these different skilled people working on the fort because everybody's like, oh, the soldiers built this. It's like, well, at the time the fort's being built, there's might be 150 soldiers. And yeah, they might have been involved in labor, but for the most part, somebody's got to protect the construction crew. So these guys are out looking around, patrolling the area.
So who builds the fort?
As far as we know, these professionals, we know that they got some, I think, carpenters from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, as far away as Lancaster. I have read one family reminiscence of their ancestor being one of the masons that built literally one of the bastions. Like they said that this is the bastion, it was like the southeast bastion he built. Now, he may not have built it all himself. He may have had a crew. We don't know who all the builders were because there had to be a lot of hands involved because
Do we have evidence of enslaved labor?
we do not.
That's interesting.
It is. Do we think that's potential? Yes, but there is no record of anybody being paid, for the use of slave labor.
Wow.
So, again, professionally built fort, meant to last, as you mentioned. So the governor's really, really, really wants this good, but the fort takes about 18 months theoretically to build. But we have a progress report from October of 1756. By October, all 4 bastions are complete. Most of the curtain walls, the long straight walls that go between the bastions, are at least partially complete. The 2 enlisted men barracks are done, and
Wow.
the timbers are cut for the officers' quarters.
Wow.
So they've done a lot in, 4 months?
And then in classic construction fashion, the crew chief was like, let's downshift here, guys. We finished this job too early. We need to, at some point we're going to sit down with the colonel and be like, we might need another 8,000 pounds. This might take 6 more months.
And that happens.
Yeah, I'm not joking.
And
I do know.
No, I know you're not joking. So the first problem that comes up is that probably by October, the weather is turning.
Right.
And you don't do, at least not in the 18th century, because I just watched them do wall work, some restoration work on the wall over the winter. You don't do mortar work over the winter. It doesn't, at least not when they're using the actual lime and sand and...
Yeah, not with the materials of the time.
Right.
Absolutely not.
So by October, they may have had to stop, at least the wall work. Some of the other work could have continued. So that is an issue, work stoppage. The other thing is that we know Governor Sharp went at least 2 more times after the initial funding for more money. So a lot of folks will say Fort Frederick was never completed because the last time, so I guess he goes 2 times successfully. The third time he goes back in, I think, November of 1757, the Maryland Assembly says no more money. They say, and again, a slight paraphrase is that your fort is too big and you do not have enough men to defend what you got.
You know nothing.
So some people have said that means that the fort was never finished. To me, it means that he wanted to do more stuff that just didn't get done. The fort that we have today, I believe, was completed. I think he wanted outer defenses and maybe some blockhouses or some stuff like that didn't get built. But it's up for debate because we just don't know. We just know they cut the funding off. So by December of 1757, construction's done. We know there's the 2 enlisted barracks, the officers' quarters, better known as the governor's house, which served as the officers' quarters, the headquarters for the fort, as well as part of the building was the storehouse for the supplies. Again, built in a similar style to the enlisted barracks, but as one eyewitness of the building says, built with some taste.
Yeah.
With arched windows and doors. It's the front facing. Literally, you walk in the gate, and at the opposite end of the fort is the building you would see. So it is a public building, and you want it to look nice, give off that power and whatnot. So that's sort of the fort construction. Between 1756 and 57, Maryland ends up raising four additional companies of troops, provincial troops. These are troops that are uniformed and paid by the colony. They are professionals, at least in the sense that they're actually getting paid and they serve an enlistment. I always like to compare them to the National Guard today, but we always compare the National Guard of today to the militia of the era, and the militia is a different beast.
Right.
They are compelled to fight, theoretically. They could find ways to get out of it. But these guys volunteered and enlisted, usually for at least a year, some longer. Some guys seem to be in the whole duration of the war that Maryland actually has troops. So they have these 5 companies, typically 2 at Fort Frederick, 2 at Fort Cumberland. The 5th company doesn't stick around too long, I think because their commander has better things to do, like being a Indian agent and translator. He seems to be more of his specialty. So they have the 5 companies, so about 500 troops. These guys will serve until 1759. So it's from about some of them as early as 1754 to 59. They're involved in the Forbes campaign in 58 that will eventually capture Fort Duquesne. And the Maryland troops are involved in a little battle called Grant's Defeat outside of Fort Duquesne, and perform admirably and take a lot of casualties. They're involved in both of the skirmishes take place at Fort Ligonier and do well and take casualties. So these guys, they don't get a lot of credit because we're a small colony. I say we like I'm.
I told you, you are a Marylander. Just accept it.
No, it's not even that. It's more the fact that I act like that I was with them, like that I am them.
What state park?
Fort Frederick.
No. What state?
Maryland.
Maryland.
Maryland
State
Park Service. I love the Maryland Park Service. I love Maryland.
There it is. End of the show, guys. Thank you for listening to History Things Podcast. That was the whole thing I wanted to get to. Good night, everybody.
This was the entire focus, just getting him to
Admit it.
Wow. Okay. Well, I guess I'll see y'all later now. So these guys are involved in some major fighting, but being a smaller colony, they don't get the press even today that Virginia does or Pennsylvania does. But these guys, they are involved in a lot of activity outside of the fort. They do not just stay there. Another thing about the fort is it's not a civilian refuge. It is a military base. And as we can see in some records from different people, including at Fort Frederick, they said you can't control civilians because you can't use military justice on them.
Well, tell that to the English. Oh, wait, we are.
That's right. We're happy colonists.
I'm just saying, waiting 20 or so more years, we're going to see a very different story here.
Yes, because of this whole conflict, which is a podcast in itself, probably a whole series.
That's all right. We'll have you back.
So those guys are involved in all the campaigns. The fort again is well constructed, never directly attacked during the conflict. One of its big moments, and then it has a near miss moment. But one of the big moments is in the April of 1757. 62 Cherokee warriors, we assume they're all warriors, show up at the gate and walk in and literally say,
"The fort is ours."
No.
Oh, sorry.
They said, "Hey guys, we want to be friends. Can we be your friend?"
Plot twist.
Yeah, well, no, it's not really a plot twist. The Southern Indians, the Cherokee and Catawba, Indians that live in North Carolina, Tennessee, South Carolina, those areas, typically ally themselves with the English, at least for a while. And the American Indians get a bad rap in a lot of ways. We've portrayed them poorly, but they're shrewd too.
Oh, yeah.
So they show up, and there's a whole nother long backstory to why they show up at Fort Frederick, but they show up and said, hey, we want to be friends. We want to be allies with Maryland. How do we do that?
Take us to your leader.
And yeah, basically, and so they write a letter to the governor, and governor writes them back. Unfortunately, he's not in Annapolis at the time. He's in Philadelphia or something. So he can't actually come out and meet them, but he sends his two, like, personal secretaries. And when I say secretaries, yeah, they wrote stuff for him, but these are more like lieutenant governors almost. Like, these guys can speak for the governor, or when they speak as the governor. And they come out, and there's a huge treaty ceremony that takes place at Fort Frederick with these Cherokee Indians. The one leader, his name is Wahatchee, and the other one is Yakdanu, and they're from two different bands. Yakdanu is from Chota, which is near Fort Loudon, Tennessee. Actually, Chota is now underwater. It's a reservoir. That's a whole thing. And
Are there remnants of it underwater, or is it like completely washed out?
I'm sure it's long gone. I know that there's some markers that indicate that it was
TVA
there. Yeah, I believe it is TVA.
Yeah. Tennessee Valley Authority flooded a lot of little battlefields and historical sites to bring electricity and whatnot to that part of the country. So
Yeah, they
Are we mad about that, or was that like it
It's one of
sucks,
those-
but it had to happen?
It's one of those things where progress flattens history on occasion. I wouldn't say mad about it because, again, it did bring a lot of what was needed to that part of the world, but there's a lot of history that's underwater now, including
Sure.
a number of Civil War battlefields.
Sure.
Yeah, definitely. So he's from Chota, and then Wahatchee, he's one of the South Carolina lowland sort of Cherokee. And so these two different groups are together there. And they form an alliance with the colony of Maryland. And what makes this cool from the Maryland perspective, and we'll get a little bit of the American Indian perspective, is that Governor Sharp says, there's one thing I want you to do. Cue the Mythbusters music. I don't know what that is, but whatever the Mythbusters music is, that's what this is. Because here's Myth Busted.
I was going to go with just dramatic suspense, but if this is a myth bust, I'll look it up. Here.
Yeah. So Governor Sharp says, teach my men your ways of fighting. So the Marylanders in 1757, yeah, they've been on the frontier. Yeah, they've got some experience. But he literally asks the Cherokee to teach the Maryland soldiers how to fight and act like American Indians in the woods. Guess what? We weren't all born with coonskin caps.
Wait, we're not all. Who am I thinking of? Davy Jones?
David Crockett, Daniel Boone.
Who's Davy Jones? Oh, I'm a pirate. I'm an idiot.
Yeah.
This would be Pat the Pirate coming out.
Yeah. So that's the only thing he asks of the Cherokee. Teach my men your ways of war, ways of fighting, something along those lines. And the Cherokee basically have a list of things they want. And they want things that they can't make. Stuff that's made of metal and iron and certain materials that aren't they cannot make or cannot make easily. Like they ask for wampum, which wampum are beads made from clamshells that the American Indians have used for millennia. But the English and the French have learned how to make them out of glass.
Oh, okay.
So they probably are actually asking for the glass wampum so that they don't actually have to make it. But they ask for knives and, pots and pans and that kind of stuff. And the Yakdanu asks for a brace of pistols. So he wants 2 flintlock pistols and a ruffled shirt,
So do I.
So then again, things he can't get and things that make them look good to their people. And a lot of the other things they ask for are like ribbons and earrings and bracelets. Now, some of that stuff they're going to wear, but a lot of this stuff is going to go back to the women. They're going to take back to their villages because in the Cherokee society, the women it's a matriarchal society and they make a lot of decisions. So you want to, as a dude, like get in good.
Let's be real. All 3 of us are married. We live in matriarchal societies in our houses.
And that's okay.
And that's true, but we don't like to admit it.
No.
And our society is, and I think in many ways has always been deep down run by our female companions, but we just wouldn't admit it.
Oh, yeah. Somewhere Edith Wilson is like, you're damn right we ran the show.
Dolly Madison, same story.
Yeah, dude, exactly.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Mary Todd. Whoa, this list can go on for a long time, guys.
Yeah, we could go on and on and on and on.
Eleanor
Roosevelt, yeah.
Jackie.
Yeah.
Barbara Bush. Just keep
Abigail
it going.
Adams.
Just keep
Abigail
it going.
for sure.
I can't think of her name, but Richard Ewell, General Richard Ewell's wife.
Oh, Dickie Ewell's
Oh,
wife?
and I have to throw him out there real quick since
All
this
right,
came up.
Do it.
So Richard Stoddart Ewell.
Ricky.
If you go back a few minutes into our conversation, there was a place called Stoddart's Fort.
Right.
That Lieutenant Stoddart is his granddad.
Really?
Is Richard Ewell's granddad.
I love connecting dots like that because Low Armistead's uncle is the Fort McHenry guy.
Right.
So it's cool to see family. And we're talking about George Washington, who's obviously, we've talked, not right in this moment, we've talked about him a bunch. He's like the most badass general in American history, not named Patton, but, I'm just kidding. Or Grant or Sherman or whatever. But, we're talking about him like long before the American Revolution. We're talking like 20 years, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
This is awesome to see these names in other places in history and kind of connect these dots.
And
like
it is.
that.
It's funny you mentioned Champions Hill.
Yeah.
At Champions Hill, there was a brigade, I believe, under a guy by the name of Tillman.
Mm-hmm.
His,
Marylander.
Exactly. Yes, and we're talking patriots of the Revolution. Tillman's, I think, might even sign. His dad or granddad might have signed the Declaration.
That sounds right.
I think that is correct. I have the declarations on my wall upstairs. I'll confirm it after recording.
Another one that one of my friends always mentions from the Civil War, States' Rights Gist.
Oh,
Yep.
yeah. He's got family buried right here like 20 minutes from where I'm living. He's got Colonel Joshua is buried in Westminster, who served in Washington's army. And then I think his brother Mordecai was a home guard, I guess you could describe him. He was part of the Maryland, like stayed local.
Right.
He stayed in state. But he was a general in that structure, and I think he was part of defending around the Baltimore region. He's buried out that way, I think, for that reason.
Right.
See, names all over
But
the
yeah,
place,
it's interesting when you look at your other eras of history and you're going, that name sounds familiar.
Dude, states'
right.
rights. What a name, by the way.
Yeah.
There's they have a sister, I think, or somebody, another family member, of Federal Ann. States' rights and Federal Ann Gist. Like,
Interesting.
good job, guys.
Hey, way to play both sides.
Classic Marylanders.
Oh my gosh.
How relevant is that, though? That's good.
That's good.
So you're talking about Stoddard.
Yeah, so I just that was it's an interesting, and of course Thomas Stoddard's son, get this right, is Benjamin Stoddard, who was the first Secretary of the Navy, and then of course you go to Richard Stoddard Ewell, which is just neat to see these connections throughout our history, like that. So let me see, where was I on?
We were talking about the women that were sort of running the show. We were talking about
the
wampum and
Cherokee,
matriarchal
the
society.
Cherokee. So they're getting, so basically they get a list of things they want, and the governor says, "Teach my men to fight like you." And there's some drama and during some of this that I won't get into, but there's almost an incident that almost ruins everything, but they get it worked out. But almost immediately, these Cherokees start taking Maryland officers and a few Maryland soldiers at a time going out on patrols. And they're going as far as Fort Duquesne.
Wow.
And they are teaching them how to fight like this. And this seems to pay off. And so this continues for a while. The Cherokee kind of come and go. They seem to be around 57 and most of 58. Even some different groups, because one of the things that the leader says, Wahatchee says something about, our track is narrow, but we will make it wide, meaning there are going to be more of us coming to see you. So with that, before the payoff, so why are the Cherokee wanting to be involved with Maryland and Virginia and Pennsylvania? Because they end up making deals with basically all three colonies at one point or another. They do this for one simple reason. The Cherokee don't like the French allied Shawnee and Delaware. They're like mortal enemies since the dawn of time, or at least that's the way it seems.
Like England and France.
Correct. So they're like, hey, these guys are going to pay us to kill guys we're already
Wanting to kill.
always at war with. So they're shrewd. And this was one of the problems in the aftermath of the war, is that the the Shawnee, the Delaware, the Cherokee, the Catawba, the Iroquois, whatever, you name the tribe, they were playing, in many cases, the English off of the French. When one of those goes away, there's no one to play off of anymore to keep the balance of power, to keep that American Indian land in between, so to speak.
Yeah.
So that's what ends up being one of the big things after the war is there's nobody for them to play off of anymore. They try it, and of course, when General Amherst comes over here, he basically says, "You're a defeated people," to his allies.
Right.
"You're a defeated people, and we're going to treat you that way." What?
What?
That would have been like
They're like, bruh.
that would be like the U.S. marching into France after World War II and being like, "It's ours now."
I mean,
Yeah.
I see what you're getting at, and that's a bold disrespect move right there.
Yeah.
And I mean, don't get me wrong, the later thing, but they were still France. They were
No,
still
yeah,
a country.
yeah.
We just had a big thumbprint on it.
Like, look,
Right.
we kind of just, look, thanks for giving us the country. We gave you yours back. I'd say we're even, but we're going to stick around for a little while.
Yeah, but in this case, it was
Yeah. Your stuff is mine now. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
That's like when I move into your sandbox.
Yeah.
It's just,
Mm-hmm.
these are mine.
Yeah, these are
Oh,
mine.
Damn.
So the Cherokee Alliance works really well. And the reason we know it works really well is by the Forbes campaign in 1758 that takes down Fort Duquesne. There's, I think, 350 Marylanders at this point in the forces of the English. Problem number one is the Maryland Assembly, guess what they won't do?
Pay them.
Pay them, because guess where they got to go? Pennsylvania. And they're like, they're leaving the colony, we're not paying them. We're not funding that. They're not defending us anymore. That's the English's problem. So literally the commander, General Forbes and Colonel Henry Bouquet, the two commanders of the British force, literally write to like William Pitt, to the Secretary of War, and go, or Secretary of State of Great Britain, says, "Hey, there's only 350 of them, and they're really good in the woods.
Yeah. Like,
Can
super
we
good.
take them on and pay as rangers for under the king's pay?" And they're like, "Cool, yeah, you can do that." Now the idea, and here's where a little bit of revolution backfires in, the idea was that Maryland would eventually reimburse the crown for the money they paid out initially.
We're really good at not repaying debts.
Yes. So he says we should keep them on the footing of rangers, and there's several references in the records between talking about them dressing somewhat as Indians, as American Indians, with breechcloths and woolen leggings and moccasins and long shirts and things like that. And even some of the more weird references, there's one where it talks about the Marylanders have one bad blanket and they're naked. They don't really mean they're naked. It's October in western Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Well, that probably means they're wearing a shirt, a breechcloth, and leggings and moccasins, and that's not good. Anybody, Western PA people know it starts snowing in September.
It's snowing right now, probably in Pittsburgh. Somebody just tune in from Pittsburgh and just tell us, like, is it snowing there right now? I'm sure it is.
Yeah. So these guys not only they're being used as American Indians, because one of the problems with the Forbes campaign is General Forbes decides he's not going to make the mistake that Braddock did, which was, and by the way, Edward Braddock is not as bad a guy in some respects as he's made out to be. He's a real jerk to the American Indians, and that's his biggest downfall.
Yeah.
But everything else about him, he was probably a good commander. That's my hot take.
Rob Ambrose, uncensored, unfiltered, raw.
But Forbes decides that he's going to build fortified, basically supply depots all the way out through Pennsylvania, which is now basically Route 30. And it takes a while. He's got to build a road, and we got to build forts. Well, the American Indians don't work that way.
Right.
They don't do sieges per se. I mean, they will besiege something, but it's completely different than cannons and trenches and stuff like that. And they finally, basically, most of them, by the middle of the summer, are like, this is boring.
All you guys are doing is waiting them out.
And you haven't gone anywhere yet. And it takes a while, to get back to the Carolinas and Tennessee, so peace. And they leave. So they begin to have to use these Anglo-Americans as American Indians, basically, using them as scouts, using them as flankers, as you want to go there.
No, you do it.
No, I'm good.
All right.
they want to put him out there. And their commander, theoretically, their senior captain, who gets promoted to lieutenant colonel by the British, John Dagworthy, ends up leading more or less the spear point of the Forbes advance. And these guys are with him, and some of the first, at least from my understanding, the first white people, Anglo people, to see Fort Duquesne on the campaign when they see that it's blown up and the French have left are from the Maryland troops. Some Indians that are with them, I guess they're Cherokee, they're not clear, see it first and tell them, and then when they go, they're like, oh, whoa. It was like, so, these guys are out there in the front. So this alliance with the Cherokee have made them into woodsmen.
Sick.
Have made them into woodsmen. And that, to me, is the coolest thing about that whole alliance. First off, that we weren't all born with a rifle and a coonskin cap.
Right.
False. We're Americans, we were. You know what? I wish Eric Money from Addressing Gettysburg was here because of how much he shits all over Maryland because he's a Pennsylvanian. Like, dude, while you guys were still being Quakers, we were learning how to be lumberjacks with rifles. Well, not rifles, but with guns. We're badass.
Yeah. Now, Pennsylvania, we give them a little love here. By 58,
Don't do it. Don't give
they have troops involved, and they're manning forts, and they are part of the campaign. And Pennsylvanians, there are some that are with the Maryland, because basically Dagworthy ends up with this mixed unit of troops, from regulars to Virginians to Pennsylvanians to maybe some North Carolinians if they didn't all get sick and die. Poor North Carolina, they really have some major issues when they're
everywhere throughout time.
Yeah. But they're clearly involved in it, and they've got troops out there. But they have a lot of guys that get sick and die there during the campaign, and I don't know what the deal is really there. But yeah, so yeah, Pennsylvania, they're doing stuff. They've got a much bigger force than Maryland will ever raise, and they're clearly involved in the campaign. But yeah, I like this. Is kind of, for me, it's that one moment that I can really point to and say, look at this.
That's awesome.
Go Maryland.
Yeah.
Of course, as soon as Fort Duquesne falls, late November of 1758, by December, pretty much Maryland is said, now you guys got to come home. And most of them get basically, I think they're given leave more so than discharge. Discharge officially comes later. A lot of them, or some of them anyways, seem to then join the Pennsylvanians and join the Pennsylvania provincials. So there are some in the Pennsylvania provincials. Some join the British regular army. Lieutenant Stoddard ends up getting apparently gets a commission briefly in the 60th. He's either in a Pennsylvania or a 60th. It's not totally clear to me, but he ends up getting sick and dying, so that's short-lived. There's another guy, Lieutenant Gorell, who ends up a lieutenant in the 60th. So there are Marylanders that go out and do other things, go to other colonies, or at least the royal troops, and some in Pennsylvania. The sad, almost near miss, the almost biggest greatness of Fort Frederick was almost the jump-off point for the Forbes campaign.
Really?
Really.
Is you going to elaborate on that?
I am. It's a pregnant pause. It's in collecting my thought and
This
trying
is
to.
like a semicolon.
Yeah.
This is a hardcore. It's not even a comma.
So, it looks like there's a pretty good indication it's going to be. There's a lot of correspondence between Sir John St. Clair and Governor Sharp. Sir John St. Clair is the quartermaster for Forbes's army. Some people think he's worthless. Some people think he's great. I'm not sure where I fall. Probably not great, but not worthless. At least in terms of Maryland, because he seems to get along with Governor Sharp. So, I'm a little biased in that case.
Okay.
He's okay.
Serviceable.
So him and Sir John St. Clair going back and forth, talking about staging supplies and being the general rendezvous of the army. Two things seem to happen. In May of 1758, there appears to be a smallpox outbreak at Fort Frederick. Strike one. Strike two. There's this guy by the name of George Washington.
Mentioned him before.
He's, 23, 24 now? And he's highly opinionated.
Yes.
He really wants Forbes's army to go through the Braddock Road and go through Virginia and Maryland to get to Pittsburgh, because he knows that he who has the road wins the West and gets the trade. If the road goes through Pennsylvania, Maryland and Virginia is screwed. So he wants this. He's like, and the road's already there. All we got to do is clean it up.
Yeah, we already have the King's Road, dude.
Right.
God.
It's not in very good shape, but it's still there. And that's where he wants to go. Well, Washington writes a letter that says, basically, that Forbes and Bouquet are kind of stupid because they don't want to use the Braddock Road. I don't understand what their problem is, why they're debating this. They should use the Braddock Road. They don't need to go through Pennsylvania. This is dumb. Guess who gets the letter?
Ooh.
Forbes.
I'm not dumb. Yeah, you
Forbes says some things about Washington, but at that point, by the time his letter is discovered, the road is now moved, for sure, from Virginia and Maryland into a full route through Pennsylvania. Now, the route through Pennsylvania, logistically, is probably better. But at the time, before this happens, they are literally building a new road from Fort Frederick to Fort Cumberland. So there are troops from Maryland, some Royal Americans, 60th Foot, some North Carolinians, and maybe some Delaware guys, lower counties of Pennsylvania, building a road from Fort Frederick to Fort Cumberland. There's Virginians under Washington building a road from Fort Cumberland to Fort Frederick, so they connect both ends. They probably get between 5 to 10 miles from completing the darn thing when they said, never mind, we're going to through Pennsylvania. So George Washington may have
had a stroke.
Screwed Fort Frederick out of its claim to fame.
All right, you know what? I've said a lot of nice things about George on this show, but I think it's time that we change the tone on old Georgie boy here.
Look, I love George Washington.
We're going to change the tone in about 20 years, though, because revolution.
George Washington is a great leader. George Washington learns from all of his mistakes. He never commits the same mistake twice.
But he does commit a lot of mistakes, so he's very smart. That's not true. But
Well,
I mean, he is smart.
Some
but
people say if you break something, it's because you were doing something. If
I
you
like
don't
it.
break anything, you weren't doing anything. So he's does a lot.
Me and George, very kindred.
So I do. So anybody thinks I'm down on George Washington, I'm not. But in the 1750s, in relationship to Maryland, we don't like him.
No.
He does come to Fort Frederick.
So an actual place George Washington has been to, because we have a lot of those he stopped and ate breakfast here signs.
Yeah, so
hilarious.
apparently, and I don't know if he stayed overnight or not. There's
no breakfast confirmation.
There's some debate on that. But in 1756, when they're building the fort, he does show up and meets with Governor Sharp, and apparently talks about how great the fort he's building in Winchester is going to be, which is made out of wood.
God damn it, George! Like, it's not always about you, man.
And apparently, also when the smallpox outbreak happened, the Virginians were actually going to come to Fort Frederick and garrison the fort to relieve the Marylanders so that they could move west, and then I guess eventually the Virginians would move west. But that does not happen either. But he does actually come to Fort Frederick once, and yes, when it comes to Maryland, he's not our favorite person. But as a historian, as an interpreter, he is he's one of the few points of reference that you can make with the lay public to relate to the French and Indian War.
Sure.
Yeah, he's probably the only name.
You mentioned George Washington, and then you can open up from there. So yeah, I love George. I love the Virginia Regiment and all that stuff.
Real quick before we leave, like the Monongahela and like the French and Indian War in a few minutes here, wasn't part of that Braddock expedition? Doesn't that feature one of his counterparts in the American Revolution too? Isn't one of the Gateses there on Braddock's staff? Like some or
Thomas Gage.
Gage. Did I say
Thomas
Gates?
Gage. You
Gage
did say
is there.
Gates.
Sorry.
So Gates, talking about people that we'll hear about later, you've got Gates, you have Washington, you have Daniel Boone, you have Daniel Morgan.
Who was absolutely captured at one point, so he was definitely defeated at some point. Popular to that myth.
Yeah, both Daniel Boone and Daniel Morgan both cut and ran. They were both Wagners, young guys, like in their teens, and when everything hit the fan, they literally cut and ran.
So he's been defeated multiple times. Dude, I'm just going to shred this fought everywhere, defeated nowhere crap. Like, dude, you were captured in Montreal, or was it, I don't know. Battle of Quebec. He's captured at Battle of Quebec.
Right.
And I think it was during the Braddock campaign, that this is when Boone gets Daniel Morgan gets his complete hatred for the English. Because I think apparently he gets hit with a sword by an officer.
That really hurt.
Like maybe when he was trying to run. There's something happens along those lines. I have to admit that also as a lover of Daniel Morgan, I should know that better. But that's how he literally holds that grudge for the rest of his life. whatever exactly it was, but something that made him hate the English.
A few years ago, the first time I said that, so he was been defeated before, you hated that so much. I think I was in Winchester at his monument, and I was like, wasn't he captured someone? You were like, dude, don't.
Daniel Morgan does not approve.
Yeah, that's what you said. Yeah, you were like, dude, don't. He does not approve. Yeah. It's like,
I still have that meme somewhere I made.
It's all right. We'll talk about the meme I made out of you one day.
Yeah,
You've been
man.
in history, bro.
That's right. So they defeat the French in this case. The French retreat because there's only a couple of hundred guys left in Duquesne by the time the British get there. So in a way, it's kind of anticlimactic. The French blow up the fort, burn it down, and leave before the English get there in 58. So again, the Marylanders are disbanded. Some of them do go back to Fort Frederick, and they stay there until about April of 1759, and they literally lock the gate and walk away.
Hope somebody has the key.
The key is left in the care of Dr. Henry Heinzman, who was the surgeon for the Maryland troops, and he is basically leased. He's leased the fort. I think he's not really leased the fort. He's leased there is a building, there is a home outside of the walls of the fort that apparently belongs to the colony that he leases, and he is the caretaker. So he probably doesn't pay for the house. The lease is probably, you take care of the fort,
And you can stay in the
and you can
house.
stay in the house.
Where on the modern day park property do we think that house was?
We're not sure, but I have some indication that it may have sat directly west of the fort near where the parking area and the concession store is today.
Okay.
Again, I can't confirm that, but I've seen pictures of that building being removed in the 1930s, and it's got some pretty old log features and whatnot underneath all of the 19th and early 20th century additions.
All right.
Interesting.
So it's potentially that building. So he's the caretaker. He's there to make sure that basically nobody walks away with the fort. 1763 rolls around, which is the end of the French and Indian War, the end of the 7 Years' War. The French and the English have a piece of Paris.
They say just time out for a little bit. We'll do this again later.
Yeah, so they signed the Peace of Paris. There is a Indian chief named Pontiac. I think he's in Ottawa. And he's out in the Michigan area,
Yep.
Oh, God.
out near Detroit.
Oh,
we're
God,
We're
here we-
very familiar with him.
Here we go.
And I won't, which is a whole awesome story in itself, but we're going to gloss over the details
The
here.
Michigan part, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, we're going to gloss over Michigan
It's fair in this
in
situation.
this situation.
Matt is dying right now.
I know, and I Pontiac's Rebellion is what it's known as. So
Yep.
let me back up.
It's super cool.
So he basically writes. He gets together with a bunch of other American Indians and sends out messengers basically saying, let's shun the ways of the Anglos and the French and let's just go to
our own
war.
thing.
Do our own thing. We're going to take it back. We're
All
going
right.
to the streets. We're going to take it back. We're going to go after these guys.
All right.
You were mentioning that American Indians don't do siege operations like we're familiar with, Pat. Pontiac's really good
Yes.
at
All right.
siege operations.
But it's not an Anglo siege.
Right.
It's completely different.
Exactly.
So Pontiac basically forms a confederation of tribes to fight this war, either known as Pontiac's War, Pontiac's Rebellion, an older version that doesn't really go out there, but some people call it Pontiac's Conspiracy. But I think that term really kind of goes out in the early 20th century.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that one
Yeah.
before.
But Pontiac's Rebellion is one of the big ones, or Pontiac's War, and they start attacking all of these newly acquired English forts from as far away as Green Bay, Wisconsin,
Yep.
to as far east as Presque Isle and Fort Le Boeuf in western Pennsylvania, Sandusky, Ohio. They lay siege to Fort Detroit, which is a city, but it's a fortified city.
Detroit.
They lay siege to Fort Pitt, the new fort that the English have built at the site of Fort Duquesne in Pittsburgh.
They burned down what becomes Chicago, if I remember right.
That may be true. Yeah, they did get some stuff in the Illinois country. They even sort of lay a loose siege at one point on Fort Ligonier in Pennsylvania, and there seems to be some activity even as far east as Fort Bedford.
Wow.
And there's even some activity on the frontiers, generally speaking. There are apparently some attacks in western Maryland and southwestern Pennsylvania, and of course in Virginia, western Virginia, between all these tribes attacking all these different settlements and forts. And they take 7 or 8 forts, like right off the jump. I mean, like, because first off, the English have acquired all this territory and they have to put troops in them. Well, we're going to put a sergeant and 5 guys here,
Right.
a lieutenant and 20 guys here, so all these different forts, they're easy prey.
Yep.
In most part because they have no idea it's coming. Pontiac didn't announce on Twitter that he was doing this. And they do some tricky stuff at some of the different forts that fall, but that's not the point of our story. So by July of 1763, things are pretty intense around Detroit and Pittsburgh and Ligonier and whatnot, and it's moving further east. So Governor Sharp writes to Dr. Heinzman at Fort Frederick and to Colonel Prather, the local militia commander near Fort Frederick, and says, open up the fort. I'm sending you guns. I'm sending you ammunition. Open up the fort. Get the militia ready. Get your alarm stations out. Start patrolling. Put a garrison in the fort. And by the way, let the civilians in. And the cool thing about this is why we know it's a military fort too. It says, let them in, but they are not allowed to harm anything. Don't let them do anything ridiculous. And if they do, you kick them out. We got to keep this place.
Don't touch anything.
Right. Don't touch anything.
Are they going to allow them into one of the 2 big barrack spaces or just the courtyard?
We assume that they were everywhere.
Okay.
The fort, the militia garrison, if they're, probably isn't very large with all the civilians in there. There are probably people living in the parade field and, different stuff. Local tradition states that there are 700 settlers and militiamen in the fort.
Wow.
So it would be pretty packed. Now,
Yeah.
there might be some staying right outside the walls or, whatever. But we know that they were allowed in there. And the fort was open periodically, or people were in there periodically from July of 1763 until sometime in 1764. Some are there for a few weeks and they leave and go home, and then some people come back. It's sort of like one of those, if you feel scared, come here. Yeah, it's a shelter. And so they seem to be coming in for almost a year off and on. So, but for a while, particularly for a few weeks, I think from like July till August, September 63, there's a big presence there. They mainly start leaving after the Battle of Bushy Run takes place, when Henry Bouquet's forces defeat a group of Indians near Bushy Run Station, not too far from Pittsburgh. They're trying to break the siege of Pittsburgh, and this battle ends up basically being what more or less breaks the siege. They realize that these guys are coming. It's the only time a bayonet charge was ever used against American Indians, and
really?
It worked. They used a tricky little plan. They basically used the double enfilading fight. They had some guys out that get attacked, and they retreat.
Oh, just, follow us, everyone.
Yeah, and they're more or less up around the edges.
It's a trap.
They come in, and the Highland troops and everybody that's with them basically bayonet charge roughly into them, and they run away at that point. So they did sort of use American Indian tactics with Anglo bayonets. It's an interesting story.
It's brutal.
Yeah, it's very brutal. And Highlanders and American Indians, that's a fight right there.
Yeah, it's a
Those
fun
are two
mix.
fun mix of people going at each other. Very, very tough warriors in their own right.
You said Highlanders?
Yeah.
Like the Scots Highlanders?
Yeah.
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 I just wanted
Fraser's
I just wanted an
Highlanders.
excuse to do the Scottish accent.
And there goes our listeners from the UK.
No, we actually, just shout out to our overseas listeners, especially in the United Kingdom. I was looking at our stats recently. We have a pretty sizable chunk of listeners hanging out in the United Kingdom. It's so pleasantly surprising. It's awesome. So thanks for tuning in, guys. We love it.
So after the Pontiac's War ends and peace sort of returns to the colonies, things start rolling again. There's the Proclamation of 1763, which says no white settlers over the Allegheny Mountains.
Right.
There's all these taxes that are being levied, or at least trying to be collected now. There's a lot of things going on, a lot of unrest in the colonies in the 1760s and early 1770s. Who knew?
Right.
a lot of this taxation, I just want to throw this out there, a lot of this taxation, that representation that people want to talk about, is all because the colonies wrote many agreements, agreed to many things where the crown would pay for something up front,
Yeah.
and then you would pay it
them
back.
That's what I mean. Like the crown footed the bill for the defenses and the troops and all that stuff, and they're just like, doing this totally reasonable thing. Like, so you're gonna hold up your end of the deal and pay us back?
So the colonies,
We were like, no,
yeah, exactly. That's exactly what happened.
this is America, son.
Because the
No, it's
colonies,
not yet.
I know it's gonna be America, son. That's George Washington's new accent once he decides to be an American.
Wow.
the Dodge commercial.
Can I ask a dumb question about
That's
George?
a hilarious commercial.
When they're driving, I do love that commercial. Can I ask you a serious but probably dumb question? Just because I think I've thought it a lot, but I don't think I've ever asked it out loud. Does George Washington have an English accent? Like, do we have any speculation on like what his voice actually sounded like as far as the traditional American accent, I guess, that we're speaking with, or
So-
did he sound more like a colonial
It would have
Brit?
depended on who he's hanging out with
Yeah,
and where he learned to talk from.
yeah. I'm gonna say he's definitely more English sounding than we do.
Right.
Okay.
But he is an American. I mean, he's born in America.
He's the first American.
He is an American, and that's one of the reasons. That's a whole other aspect of his life. He wants to be English,
Yes, he does.
but he never quite gets accepted. In the way he wants to be a British officer.
Yeah, no, I
and
know.
Braddock supposedly tells him, "I'm going to get you a commission," and then Braddock dies. Yeah, and that messes that up. So I think Washington's accent is going to be definitely more English sounding than we do today, but I have a feeling that it's not going to be as clean as good Queen's or King's English in this case.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to have some sort of an American accent, I think, to it. We've been here long enough. I mean, you figure people have been living in this country, white English colonists.
100 years plus at that point.
Right. Yeah, you're looking at, what,
Pushing
100,
two.
almost 200 years. Yeah, 160
Yeah.
years, whatever. So I'm sure there is some development of that. It's kind of like the further south you go, the more southern someone's accent is, I think, in some respects.
It's weird. There's also like the further north you go,
Yes.
you also
Yeah.
get southern accents now. It's so weird.
Oh.
Have you ever been to Pennsylvania? You think those people are from Texas?
Well, I was thinking about Massachusetts.
No,
and
I know,
even
but no, I
New
know.
England.
In reality, no. The regional accents absolutely start
Yeah.
to develop at this time. But
So-
I wonder how many people have thought that, and I apologize if the listeners out there are like, "That's a dumbass question," but I don't really think it is because it's just something I don't think you think about a lot.
Yeah, I tend to think that's not as British sounding, not as, was that, or the BBC English as we call it.
I wish I could do a Texas/British accent simultaneously. I just assume that other countries just assume we all sound like we're from Texas. So
They do.
no, I know. What did I send? Did I send you the meme of Prince Harry the other day? It's like, so what did you?
Oh.
What have you been doing since you've been in America? It's like the other day I deep fried a loaded gun. I was like, yeah, we're awesome. So we're at this point in time now where essentially the crown is asking for its money back, and we're starting to have a problem with that because reasons. And in the 1760s and 1770s, we start to enter these not like outright resistances, but there's pushback against this. There's turmoil. There's upheaval amongst the colonies. It's not just isolated to specific areas anymore. It's kind of like people in the Georgia and Carolina colonies are like, yeah, I kind of agree with the New England colonies, and Maryland's probably down here straddling both sides of the fence because that's what we do. Literally, every era that we're going to talk about probably on the show where we're talking about Maryland, it's sitting on both sides of this. So
And it's because it's smack dab in the middle.
That's
yeah.
true.
We-
Stuck in the middle with you.
We are the ultimate border state at all times in history. So even when we're a border colony.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely there's committees of correspondence and safety, and there's a Liberty Tree and Annapolis and all this stuff. But yeah, we're definitely, as Maryland as a colony, is definitely, yeah, like you said, almost the ultimate border state.
We are for the casual listener, if you like sports, Maryland is a fair weather fan. We're like, oh yeah, go England, and then it's like we're gonna win the revolution. They're like, I was in from day one, baby, independence, and then like in the Civil War, we're like, go Confederacy. And then by 1862, we were like, psych, 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 totally kidding. We were just joking. We were never, it was just Baltimore, guys. We were like, Union forever, down with the trainer. Like, we're just singing Battle Hymn of the Republic anytime we see anybody. And then, like, look at their sports teams now. Their teams are good. They freak out. But the moment, like, Orioles fans a few years ago, and you can attest to this because you're an Orioles fan.
I am an Orioles fan.
A few years ago when who's the guy you paid $1 million to for nothing? Chris Davis. He hit all those home runs, and everybody was freaking out. And then, like, 2 seasons later, you guys like were 20 games back, 10 games into the season somehow, because that's what you guys do.
That's
but
true.
like, Orioles fans were nowhere to be found. Like this year, right now, there's a 4-way race for the AL East. The Orioles are like conveniently 9 games back. Like, we threw a no-hitter though. I mean, you did. That was a great.
John Means.
That was a great game. But Maryland, I always joke historically, whether it's sports or military or political history, we are like the worst fair weather fan. We're after our own interest, guys. That's basically the lesson on Maryland. Just apply it to whatever era you're studying.
And that's the lesson of the American Revolution, or at least the outbreak of it. It was about our own interests, whatever that may be. Everybody may have different interests, but the taxation, it may have been their business interests, or the loss of revenue, or different things stepping in. And again, it's unfortunately, as much as I hate to say it, it's rich man's war, poor man's fight.
Yeah.
But it made the greatest country in the world. I
Hit it. Play the national anthem. Go get Ronald Reagan. I agree. This is America. No, I do love those videos. It is awesome. So let's fast forward a little bit in just for the sake of time. So war is starting to break out. In the 1773 we have obviously the famous Boston Tea Party, and like it's starting to get real hot. 1775 we have Lexington and Concord, right? Like the shot heard around the world. Like we haven't declared independence yet, but the war is on. The year plus later, the Declaration of Independence is written and signed, and officially we are acting as a sovereign nation. No longer are we just looking to stay a part of the family and just kind of run our own show. Now we're like, screw you, we're out of here. It's America time. What is happening at the fort right around sort of in the years between the Tea Party and the Declaration? Like, get us into the Revolution now.
Yeah, so during those years between 64 and we'll say 75, the kind of the beginning of the Revolution, not much is happening at Fort Frederick. It is just sitting there as best we can tell. We lose track of Dr. Heinzman for a while. He ends up at one point in debtor's prison, and people actually try to get him out. He's like, nope, I'm staying.
Wow.
I guess he was proud. I don't know. So we don't really know what's exactly happening. We do know there is one reference that in 1775, the Committee of Safety is going, hey, we need to look for guns and stuff in the colony. And they're like, oh, yeah, there's cannons and some muskets and ammunition and stuff at Fort Frederick. We should go get that.
Just sitting there?
Yeah. So
what kind of shape are they in?
Well, that's a great question. My assumption is it's the 4 cannon from the fort, and then some muskets and stuff. And there was a couple other places that they mention in this list. I think there's still stuff in Cumberland. And they're like, hey, we should go get that. So that's one of the reasons our confirmation, people used to argue that the cannon never made it to Fort Frederick. And it's like, there's pretty good confirmation that in 1775 going,
hey, they're there.
They're there. Yeah. We should go get them.
We need to, yeah.
So that's the first reference to the fort during the war years. So war breaks out. You mentioned 76. We're full-fledged into this thing. 1777, America gets their first real, outside of Trenton, gets their first real victory.
Yeah.
And of course, guess who's not involved?
Is it George?
Yeah, Washington's not there.
Hey, this is America now. You got to speak positively about George, all right?
It's weird because when I
watch your mouth.
think revolution and in the victories, you think always George Washington. He is not.
Yeah,
it's
no.
General Gates, Granny Gates, one of Washington's nemesis.
Right.
Wins the Battle of Saratoga, theoretically. I mean, I think Benedict Arnold and the troops win the battle, but Gates is the overall commander, so
Isn't
he gets
that
the
where
credit.
the only monument to Benedict Arnold is? Is that Saratoga?
That is correct.
And it's like a name. His name's not
His
on
name
it,
is
right?
not to the hero of Saratoga.
It's
Right.
just his boot.
It's boot. Yep.
Yeah, you don't say that. Can't say his name.
Eggs Benedict.
Yeah.
Loser. Benedict Cumberbatch. Not
Great
Benedict,
actor.
but not Benedict Arnold.
So we win, and we capture this army of General Burgoyne's at Saratoga.
Gentleman Johnny.
And we have this problem. We have prisoners.
Where the hell do we put them?
Several thousand prisoners. And they immediately got to figure out where do we put them. And this has been an issue already with some of the other battles and stuff. Even when the Lexington and Concord happened, the retreat to Boston, we actually captured some British guys, and we had to figure out what to do with them. But so they're like, what do we do with all these guys?
Can we go? No.
Typically, that's what you do. Typically, they're
'em.
paroled.
Yep.
And in this case, they would be sent back to England, never to fight in North America again. There's a couple. There's a couple issues here. One, Congress. Two, Great Britain.
Yeah.
Congress doesn't want to give up the prisoners because they're pretty sure that they will come back and fight.
Yeah.
Also, because there's prison ships and stuff in New York, and there's some bad treatment. They're like, you know what? We're going to keep these guys. Great Britain also does not recognize
American sovereignty.
So if they would get into a deal with the United States of America to get those prisoners, guess what they are admitting to?
They're acting in diplomatic negotiation.
Correct.
Yo, this is a chess game, guys.
It is. It's a chess game, and
But
so
we're playing checkers because this is America.
so it's sort of a tit for tat thing, and in some cases locally officers would work on paroles and stuff, but in this case, everybody digs in their heels, and it's not going to happen. So these guys are known as now the Convention Army and the Convention prisoners because there was a convention, so to speak, written, but it never got done with. Well, they're trying to figure out what to do with them. They end up moving around. I think they're at Boston, outside of Boston for a while. They end up sending them to Charlottesville, Virginia. A lot of them. They end up in other places too.
Now, did they divide up the Convention Army? Because there's a whole bunch of Hessians in it, too.
So
Hessians, excuse me.
they
I thought it was right at Hessians.
Hessian.
Tomato. Which one is Christopher Walken?
You could just say German.
German's probably more accurate. honestly.
Yeah, because they're not all from Hessia.
Right,
Which,
exactly.
but they've been colloquially known as the Hessians. So yeah, they do split them up some, but they're British and German prisoners that are sent to Charlottesville, Virginia, because at that point, Charlottesville seems like a long way away from the war.
Yeah.
It's happening in South Carolina. It's happening up north in New York and Massachusetts. Albemarle County, Virginia seems like a good place to go. So they send them there, and so they're there for a while. Winter, like December of 77, January of 78, a guy by the name of Samuel Hughes is now sent to Fort Frederick to look and see if it would make a good place convenient to put prisoners. And he goes out and looks at it, and he writes a report and says, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but we could do it.
But it's freaking huge.
But it's freaking huge. So,
Quote.
So-
freaking huge.
at some point, apparently there is no more caretaker, because by the time Hughes is there in 76, 77, he's talking about the officers' quarters has no siding up about 6 feet. So it's just studs on the outside. He talks about the officers' quarters not having a second floor, literally a floor, not the story. The floor is gone.
Is this through like degradation, or is this because people have scrapped it for firewood and various
sounds like
other things?
scrapping to
Yeah.
me.
It is the Five Finger Home Depot.
Yes. Oh yeah. People in the area all over the place have bits of Fort Frederick on their homes.
Correct. There's stones missing.
Do we know today if there are any pieces of the fort identified off-site, like in towns like Hagerstown, which were close enough to maybe see some of these raw materials?
Besides a few stones.
Or scavenged materials, rather?
Besides a few stones, no. But we figure, yeah, if we could find some good 18th century, like mid to late 18th century homes in the area, we could probably find some reused fabric, because we know that that's what they were, more than likely what they were doing with the boards off the building. They left the nails. The guy's like, you can reuse the nails. They're still here. They took the boards because it was cut lumber.
That's awesome.
They took windows. They took doors. Because he's like, we're going to have to plank up these windows. We're going to have to put some doors in. We're going to have to do some of this stuff because it was taken for building materials. Some guy knocked part of the wall down so he could back his wagon up to get the supplies, the stuff out, where the Sally Gate should have been.
His Dodge, Ram, physically a Ram that he named Dodge, who's pulling a cart. He backed it up and was like, hey, we got to get all this out of here.
Yeah. So they know they're going to have to repair the wall. They know they're going to have to do some work. But he's like, yeah, we can do it. He said, we can knock on a floor in this building. And he mentions that the backs between the fireplaces and some of the rooms because there's fireplaces are back to back, 2 different fronts, and he's saying that the backs have burned out, they're gone. And we're like, yeah, we can just use them as one big fireplace and different things. So he gives us a pretty good description of what the fort looked like at that point, and gives us some of our details of how we reconstructed the barracks that are there are based off of his letter. He also mentions it being winter, that where the holes knocked in, or the sections knocked out of the wall, he says, we're going to have to put up some stockade wall here because we can't do mortar work this time of year.
Because it's the winter.
Because it's the winter. Talks about the well in the fort. He mentions a well outside of the fort. He mentions it has water. So he feels pretty good about it. He said the only thing is there's no lumber, like no trees for firewood on the property.
Wow.
Which makes sense. When it was in use, they cut the trees down, 1, so that they could see for the artillery range of a half a mile, and 2, for firewood. So they literally had to buy firewood from a firewood vendor. Yeah, they had them back in the 18th century. Who knew?
We still got them now.
Yeah.
Can I get a cord? It's like, you think that's all we're probably gonna need a lot more than a cord. There's like thousands of people coming.
Yeah, but they talk
2
about
cords.
They talk about buying cords of wood, where they're going to buy it from.
That's awesome.
Yeah, because they don't have it there. And they mentioned that there were a couple of buildings still outside of the fort. And they said, you know what? If we moved them up, I don't know where down was, but we moved them up, these buildings would be good for quarters for the guards outside of the fort. So I don't know if they were big buildings or they're just like, well, here's 2 buildings, it'd be 2 less we've got to build. But they talk about moving some buildings. So he's like setting the stage for the use. He's saying, here's my report, do what you want. By spring, probably April, May of 1778, the first prisoners and guards arrive at Fort Frederick. Where did they come from? I don't know.
Really?
I don't know where the prisoners exactly came from at this point. The guards initially are the survivors of the Virginia Maryland Rifle Regiment, a.k.a. Rawlings Rifle Regiment, that took their lickings during the New York campaign.
Yeah.
They were at...
The Immortals.
Yes. I always get it confused. I guess they were at Fort Washington, and they sort of apparently held out to the last so everybody else could escape.
Right.
Colonel Rawlings was wounded. He was exchanged, and according to some accounts from some of the veterans, they were in captivity for weeks into months, and then they were paroled. But this was like a local parole. Like, this wasn't run through big UK government, big American government. This was a local thing, so they got paroled. But the idea was they were paroled, so guess where they sent them? Where's a great place to send guys that can't fight in your war anymore? We'll send them to the Fort Frederick to guard prisoners. So Rawlings has the survivors. He tries recruiting more troops. He actually gets some bounties to try to get more men to help build up his regiment of troops. Now, some of his men have been distributed to other regiments and whatnot because they're involved with Daniel Morgan's rifles and whatnot. But they're there. So those guys are the first guards of the prisoners. They're there for about a year guarding prisoners. But again, there's a large number of prisoners that seem to come through in the hundreds. But where exactly they came from is very sketchy, because if you read the pension records, and of course these guys are writing these pensions in the 1820s, 30s, and 40s. They're pretty darn old guys. Right. Some of their memories are off. Some of them are saying they're at the fort 2 years before the fort was in use. They're saying they're in 76. Some of the guys, one guy literally says, I was here with my brother, and him and his brother both left pension records, and they both contradict each other.
Oh, good.
His brother's like, I hadn't seen my brother in years.
I think they both verify that they were there, but the date...
Yeah, no, I
but
know.
it's like... So that's a little sketchy where the prisoners are coming from at this point. But they're... So, 78, 79, the rifle regiment is there. They get orders in, I think, May of 79 to go west to Fort Pitt. Again, I think this has still got to do with their parole. They're not going to be with the main army anymore. They're going to go out west and fight against English allied American Indians for the most part, and British troops too. So they get sent out there, but I don't know if it was by choice or what, but Rawlings stays on at the fort as the commander, and his men leave. Most of them do anyways. I think a few of them stay on, a couple of the officers and whatnot, but for the most part, the regiment goes out to Fort Pitt. They're out in the western part of the campaign. I always think it's kind of neat that there's this little connection between Fort Frederick and Fort Laurens, Ohio. the most western American fort of the Revolution. Some of the rifle regiment men who had been at Fort Frederick are stationed at Fort Lawrence the last few weeks that it's around before the Americans abandoned it. And I was like, wow, so from one backwater to the other. Of course, it was just one of those, I went out to Fort Lawrence one day, I had no idea, and I'm like reading the history, and I was like, whoa, there's a direct connect between these two kind of unknown forts of their eras. Then militia guys are brought in, county militias, some local, some from other parts of Maryland, to guard prisoners. At one point, the supply situation is so bad that the Colonel Rawlings says, all right, I can't feed them, I can't clothe them, and we're getting too many in here to house them. I'll rent them out. Now, I don't know if Rawlings actually gets any money out of the deal, but basically he leases out, lets out, however you under parole, the prisoners that are at the fort to local, as they said, good Whig farmers to be basically labor. I won't say more like indentured servitude than slavery, because in some cases they are making money. And even when they're at the fort, they make money. We find accounts of where British soldiers are being paid for doing repair work and stuff on the fort.
But the key is they're not like, even though they're getting slightly compensated here and there, it's like, well, can I go home? No. Like, that's a key part of that.
Correct. They can't leave.
Like, can I have another pence? We don't call them pence in this country, brah.
Actually, I'm pretty sure we still did.
No, we did at that time.
Continental dollars, baby.
Yeah, that's right. Before George. George was like, you know whose face would look good on this? Yeah.
Ain't worth a Continental.
Mine, baby.
That's right.
So he's got them out, and for the most part, it seems like most of the prisoners are gone from the fort for quite some time. And then either true or overblown, there are accounts of them causing some problems in the neighborhood. I don't know how much neighborhood there is in 1778, 79, or 79 and 80 around Fort Frederick, but maybe it's bigger than I thought.
There's not a lot of neighborhood around there now.
That's what I was going to say.
Right.
What?
Right. Well, and that's the thing. That actually is one of the reasons that it's counterintuitive to me. That they find it harder to put prisoners away from population centers than to have them in population centers. Because apparently, if you put prisoners in a town or a city, there are more people watching them, and you need less guards. Again, counterintuitive. If I'm building a prison, where do I want to put it? As far away from people as possible.
Yeah.
Right? So because we don't want them to do bad things.
Right.
So, and again, I didn't picture the British prisoners being, modern criminals or anything, but the idea that to me it's counterintuitive.
The concept is the same, is to keep your perceived threat or something further away from your gen pop areas, your general population areas.
And I think it also has to do with supply. It's easier to get supplies in the town and the city where now you've got to chuck it out there.
Sure.
But they start moving them to places like Fort Frederick and to Charlottesville and to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, having prisons in because it's further away from the coast. We want the prisoners far away from the coast because where are the British operating?
Off the coast
right.
or on the coast, yeah.
So eventually, that's one of the reasons that the Saratoga prisoners end up at Fort Frederick. There's a guy by the name of Arnold running around Tidewater, Virginia. And he's forming this thing called an American Legion, and he's going to, win back America. Well, they said, maybe we should move these guys from Charlottesville. And it was probably a good idea. I mean, he does burn Richmond. So he gets pretty close. So they ended up trucking those guys, marching. They didn't truck them anywhere. Marching those guys from Charlottesville to Fort Frederick. And
wait, I just lost track of the timeline. Has old Benny switched sides at that point?
Yeah,
so that's when
Benny switched sides.
So it just flew over my head, like when you said "Take Back America." I was like,
that's what the American Legion was. They were loyalists.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll ask this in the follow-up, but I'm going to ask it now. Don't answer it. But what's the connection between him and the American Legion as we know it now? So none, right? But it's just my brain is just attached to that. So that's something I want to clarify in the next episode.
Right. So they send these prisoners. Now, some of them are German. Most of them are British. But we also know that they don't... Well, I shouldn't say... The prisoners in Charlottesville are British and German. They don't typically remove the Germans The Germans tend to stay. And then when they did move them, they moved them to Winchester. And then they kept them there. Because, one, Maryland's like, how am I going to provide for all these people? And two, the Germans aren't going anywhere.
Right.
They're theoretically mercenaries, and life was hard.
Yeah.
They're getting sold from country to country to go fight wars. It's like, oh, I could just stay here.
Yeah, they themselves are not mercs, but the princes that they are under, you could argue.
Yeah, they're being treated that way
Correct.
by their leadership.
Correct. So they send a bunch of these British prisoners to Fort Frederick, and it's getting crowded. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but if they don't release prisoners, which I don't ever see records of releases, from the time that the fort is initially open to the time that the war ends, I mean, we are talking thousands of British prisoners that are housed in and around Fort Frederick. Again, maybe someone more scholar than me that could tell me that I'm completely full of it, but I've never seen a record that says they're not there. So I got to assume, based on the lack of that evidence, that they are there. So you have militia guarding them. We also have a company of Maryland state troops that are raised under Captain Reed, who are there guarding the prisoners, and that seems to be what their job is. They were raised literally to guard prisoners. 1781, we jump a little bit ahead in the timeline, not much, but we've got these people languishing. Oh, in 1780, there is an attempt by the prisoners to escape, a mass escape attempt, because the well dried up, they had no food. So apparently they try to force the gate, and as Colonel Rawlings succinctly wrote, they were put down.
Wow.
Or the attempt was put down. The end.
Handled that.
Yeah.
Don't ask questions.
So exactly how, I don't know, but I tend to think that guards were sent in the fort and forced them back at bayonet point, and there may have been casualties, but we don't know. But it's just so blunt. Was put down.
Was there ever a burial ground associated with the fort?
So yes, we know there was a cemetery. Unfortunately, we've lost it.
Okay.
So there's still English out there, probably.
There are Maryland troops buried there. They're probably from the French and Indian War. There are probably North Carolina troops buried there from the French and Indian War. We know the last fort commander during the French and Indian War, Lieutenant John Riley, is buried in that cemetery. That's one of the reasons we know it exists, because a guy wrote about it in a diary. Said that the funeral procession went by our door in the village, and they buried him. They fired 3 volleys over him and all that stuff. So we know there's a cemetery on property. We have not been able to locate it, nor the village. There was a village that sprung up during the French and Indian War that we have not been able to locate. Last summer, there was an attempt by archaeologists to locate it in a big swath of area we thought it could be in, and they turned up nothing. So I think we're narrowing it down, but again, we don't know. There's some potential that it may actually be in our picnic area, underneath the playground and the picnic area, but we just don't know. And what's sad is that apparently the cemetery was still known in the 20th century.
Really?
You're going to find that one then. If it was known that recent to us, that's the kind of thing I feel in my bones. Like, you're going to find that one. If it was known that recent in time.
Yeah, 1920s, I think. There's a reference to it that the ranger or whatever at the park literally roped it off, like staked off where it was, but no one...
So there's probably
somewhere,
still physical evidence on the surface of that somewhere. It's probably hard to find, but...
Or just under.
Matt, you want to help?
Absolutely.
Matt and I are going to find it. Don't worry. History Things Podcast is on the case,
there
fellas.
you go. Well, like I said, Maryland Historic Trust came out last year and
amateurs
and did some
just kidding.
did some test holes in a big area, and then they're supposed to come back at some point and move to another location as well. But again, it's hard for archaeologists to find something, sadly, if they don't know where they're looking.
Sure.
That's why historians are important.
They can't use GPR or radio spectrometry or anything like that unless they have an area. Like, here's where we think it is, and then they can go looking. If they're just flying blind, it makes it tough.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what happened this time. We said, well, we think it was probably in this area based on these features. and they went through and every so often dug a test pit and nothing. I think they said they found one brick fragment, and it was like one little brick fragment, I think one modern nail or something. So, yeah, we have to be able to try to narrow it down, and unfortunately the only location that we've got is from an uncited source in a history book that says it was east of the fort. Oh, okay. Is it magnetic east, or is it historical east? And that's a big area.
Yeah.
And we've done visual looks, like in the wintertime, it's a good time when all the leaves are off the trees, and we've looked at
But it's also
land.
not, because when they drop the leaves, it raises the ground up. And
Sure.
it could be, like, when I say, like, there's probably surface physical evidence, maybe, like, it could cover that. And what are you going to sift through the leaves of a forest? Have fun.
Yeah, but someday we're hoping to find it.
Oh, you're going to find the cemetery. I'm confident
And if we
in that.
find the cemetery, then we'll be able to probably track down the village, because literally the guy who says where he is and sees the funeral is in the last house furthest from the fort in the village. So if you find the village, you find the cemetery. If you find the cemetery, you find the village.
I'm so excited for that day when it comes for you, man. That's going to be awesome.
Yeah, and it may. And again,
will.
if we could find, there are getting to be so many more documents available online and through like newspapers and stuff like that. So we're piecing little things together, and a lot of it's come from that like our idea that maybe in the picnic area comes from a couple of references to some features in that area. That it's like, well, that could be tied in to that. Well, and I'll explain it to you why. So there's a reference to that area being known as Kitty Long Hollow, and then there being a spring called Kitty Long Spring. Well, the only hollow in modern park is our picnic area.
Right.
And there are actually 2 springs in that area. In the village, the house that the James Kinney, the diarist, was in was Samuel Long's house. Samuel Long, and I cannot remember now if it was wife, mother, or daughter, but had a relative named Kitty.
You're already on it. This is...
Right, and that's... But
the pieces are coming
the
together.
pieces
Yeah.
are coming together. So, and that's why we're like, well, and, I know, that area was called Kitty Long Hollow by people who lived at the fort property. And they said, that's Kitty Long Hollow. And it's like, well, Kitty Long, because I was like, Long, that's the name of this guy. And yeah, I mean, but the rabbit holes aren't very deep in some cases, because having to use things like Ancestry.com or whatever.
Sure.
You go as far as that person can give, that tree might give you if you can't find the other documents or whatever. So, yeah, so we're hopeful. It's kind of fallen off the radar a little bit right now, but it's been on there recently.
So how do we get to... So with the war winding down in the early 1780s, where we have this thousands of prisoners rotating through, do some of the British troops from Yorktown, make it all the way up there as prisoners? I think I remember you telling me that at one time. So famous battles like Saratoga, but also Yorktown.
Absolutely. So Yorktown, they send prisoners. George Washington actually writes the order of who's to go there. Now, this is where...
I was at this fort once. It wasn't as cool as my fort in Virginia, but it will do.
I do love... Somebody asked me the other day if anybody famous from the Revolution was at the fort. And I said...
George Washington.
Well, during the Revolution. I said,
I see what you
not particularly, unless you count Colonel Rawlings, who's regionally famous, so to speak. A minor character. But the fact that in the writings and the documents, all of these people are writing about Fort Frederick at some point. Washington and people like the British generals and the secretaries of war and the different people in the Congress. Like they're referencing it. Yeah, they might not be there, but it's cool to go, whoa.
The place is known.
Yeah, the place is known. It's a known commodity, and sometimes they're complaining about where it's located and stuff. I was like, oh, I'm gonna send people there. So 1781, October, I guess early November, after the surrender, Washington orders a number of units to Fort Frederick, British and German. The German ones, though, do not go to Fort Frederick. They end up going to Frederick, Maryland,
Yep.
to the Hessian barracks. And there's been prisoners there before. And I think that's one of the big issues with our story. We are Fort Frederick. There were German prisoners, and some British prisoners in the Hessian barracks, today known as, in Frederick, Maryland. Some of the German writers called it Fort Frederick.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so we've got this long-running story that Fort Frederick had German prisoners. We have not found any documentation to support that, nor any archaeology to support German prisoners being at the fort.
Oh, so I was mistaken then when I referenced that.
I have one prison guard that says he guarded German prisoners at Fort Frederick, and he's clearly at Fort Frederick, because I'm pretty sure he says it's on the Potomac or near Hagerstown or something like that. And but we got lots of family traditions out there saying, hey, my family guarded Hessian prisoners. I'm like, please show me the documentation. And I always feel like it's a challenge. It's not. It's like, I want to see it. I want this to be true. I think this would be cool. But at this point, it's not. I mean, most of the guys who are guarding prisoners there call them British or just call them prisoners. And usually they make the distinction between German and British prisoners.
Yeah.
The only other potential is that there was one unit that may have, I think it's the 37th foot maybe, that was captured at Saratoga that may have come to Fort Frederick. We don't know for sure if they were there. And they had one company that were German speakers.
Oh, okay.
That potentially could be it. The guys knew there were guys speaking German.
I heard the guy speaking freaky Deutsch.
Yeah, so I don't know, but definitely British prisoners. So when the prisoners from Yorktown arrived, this is one of the cool things to me. The commander Rawlings writes a letter to the governor, and he says, "So we just got it's 1,100 is the total. But I'm not going to give the totals. But the largest number he says are soldiers, and then he says we have X number women, X number of kids, and X number of sailors." And it totals like almost 1,100, and he says, the fort is pretty full.
It sounds pretty full.
We know the fort is so full that they're building huts on the parade field. They're living in the 3 barracks, and married troops who have their wives with them are allowed to build huts outside of the fort because they're not going anywhere. They've got their wives and kids, and that's from a Corporal Fox. He was with the 47th Foot, who spends a short. He does travel through. I don't know. He's only there for a few weeks and moves on. I'm not so we may have guys moving in and out, but like
I'm
I said,
getting this like Revolutionary War Andersonville vibe.
Yes,
like where there's just like shanty shacks made out of whatever.
correct.
That's crazy.
Yes, and although it's hard to see today, in the 70s they did some infrared images of the fort, and I think that the film sadly is starting to deteriorate because it's hard to see now. You used to be able to see the hut pits on the in the parade field.
Wow.
Also, and this is a tradition that we can't verify, but if you look at the fort today, you can see at least 11, some inside, some outside, these sort of pit marks, big pit marks at the base of the wall. We believe that's where huts were built up against the wall, and that was the fireplace back, and it burned away broke down the stone, and those pits are from, and they're all over the fort, and like I said, there's some outside as well.
That's awesome.
So it is full. It is very full, and it's so bad that they may have, or they considered pulling all the prisoners out of there. I think it's Abraham Skinner, the main prison. Deputy commissioner or whatever he was, I can't remember the title exactly, comes to the fort and says the fort's terrible. It's not inhabitable. But they seem to still stay there. There's some indication that they may have ended up moving them all to Frederick or to Lancaster later, but I tend to think that based on what we know, is that 1782, 83, they're still there before they're shipped, marched to New York and sent home. But yeah, no matter how long the fort is in operation after 82, and no matter how many people are actually there at one time, is it the grand total of 5,000 or whatever that I've come up with based on the numbers that I've seen, even 1,000, 2,000 people in that fort is too much. The enlisted barracks were built for 100 men each.
Well, that's what you were saying. Like, I think you threw out the number like 300 at one point, but that included men outside in the fort and like also that were like rotating out on patrols.
Correct. The fort, that was right. The fort was, in Sharp's mind, was meant to be for 300 men, 200 in the fort, and 100 out always patrolling.
Yeah.
And then the officers' quarters, now mind you, empty out the rooms. You could put a lot of people in it, but it was only built to accommodate about 8 officers. And then the storehouse. Now, that building was about 90 feet wide and about the same width as the barracks, so you could probably put 100 guys in there, and you could put more. I mean, the governor also says that the fort could double its strength in an emergency, so I'm sure he's thinking about moving tables and letting guys sleep on the floor. So even then, the barracks holds 400 men.
Yeah.
So you put 1,000 people in there.
The fire marshal is like, what are you doing?
Yeah, and also, too, if you look at the records, and again, Revolutionary War records aren't always good. They're not complete. I've only found 3 references to food the entire war at Fort Frederick.
Oof.
That's something that sticks out to me when I made the Andersonville references. One of the first things that you taught me about this fort when I discovered that when you made it known to me that there was British prisoners of war held here and things like that, you described the scene as like, look, this wasn't just a crappy place for the British soldiers and camp followers and various other prisoners, but like the supply chain issues they were having also affected the guards themselves.
Correct.
And so when you say the reference, like 3 references to food, like I remember you basically telling me like the mentality was like these people would be asking for food and things like that, and the soldiers that were guarding them were like, what makes you think you're going to get food when we can't get it ourselves?
Exactly.
Like, I'm eating before you, dude.
Right. It's not probably a pleasant station for the guards, and I think that's, then that was another issue with using the militia, because militia guys are like, I'll just go home.
Yeah.
Right.
I got food at my house.
And that's probably one of the reasons they enlisted those state troops. And again, I don't know how many they actually got. I'd like to say, you would think if it was a company, 25 to 100 guys. American companies probably more like 25.
Sure.
But yeah, it's not a good place for the guards. It's definitely not a good place for the prisoners. And imagine too, we think of war as men historically, but there are women and children in this fort. So imagine the logistical issues of having not only men, but having to deal with, for the women, having to deal with their own sanitation and hygiene and health, and children, and dealing with that, keeping them fed and healthy and alive. And then there's sailors there, and you know what sailors are like.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, but I sorry, because I know you're a big pirate guy.
Yes, lay it on me.
So they called them sailors in this reference, and they are sailors. But they're actually
Privateers. Yes, let's go. Sanctioned pirates, baby.
Yep. Absolutely.
Sanctioned pirates. They're and the only officer that I know that for sure kept at the fort was Captain Matthew Mangan. And Captain Matthew Mangan ran a ship on the Chesapeake Bay, and he was a terror. He burned houses and terrorized people and did all those things that a pirate of
good caliber, good quality.
Of our conscience. The pirate, the pirates that we think of. That's what he did. And it's kind of interesting because I have got a couple guard references. One says I guarded sea robbers at Fort Frederick, and one that says I guarded pirates.
He said, you best start believing in ghost stories.
Now, these privateers are typically Americans. Mangan is from New York. Now, I don't know if he's first generation or whatever, but this is sort of the Civil War aspect of the Revolution. You've got these guys who could be American by birth, acting as privateers for the crown, and then they're kept at Fort Frederick. Yeah, there's some kept at Fort Frederick. So
there's no honor among thieves. Who's paying me the most?
Yeah.
There we go.
Or they just really like the king. I don't know. I mean, I don't know Mangan's story before the war.
I don't think the pirates were fond of the English monarchy. Just,
Yeah, but again, what were I don't know what his motivation was. Was it literally a pirate's life for me, plunder and all that stuff, or was it I want to mess with these stupid patriot types, rebels?
All of the above, maybe.
Yeah, it could be.
Who knows?
I don't know. But he is mentioned in their letter saying, watch him.
So when I joked about coming to see you dressed as a pirate, I could find a more late 18th century version of the pirate sort of thing that I do, and I could actually be a potential POW at your fort.
Yes.
Yeah, please. That's all you
You're
needed to say.
still going to have to shave the beard.
No. I'm a pirate.
I don't know about the beard, but neither here nor there. So when we do our program, we usually do around the 4th of July a little thing about the Revolution. And usually when I have enough staff, we have one person at least that will dress up and say that they're, portraying a sailor or a privateer. They might wear slops or civilian attire and just like, yeah, I'm a privateer, and explain that part of the story.
I'm your guy. Let's do it.
That sounds good. You're on.
I'm not shaving my beard.
I don't care.
This guy
Only because you're a pirate.
he says that out of just envy, just so you know that. Matt,
A little bit.
Matt's like, he's got the cool Robert Gould Shaw thing going on,
Absolutely.
but like he does want
Yeah.
a Caleb Brewster like I have.
Sure.
I'm not physically capable of doing
No,
that, though.
he's just not a beard guy like me.
I would be curious how the British soldiers got along with the privateers.
Probably not.
I would agree. I would think that I would tend to agree with that. I mean, but that would be an interesting. Too bad more people didn't write about their experience at the fort, because that would be a cool thing to find out.
That is such an interesting. Before we sort of jump ahead, because we want to get into the Civil War stuff a little bit before we wind down. It just kind of blows my mind the amount of things people write down throughout history in random places. How little there is actually written about. Like, there's so much written about Fort Frederick as far as like references. People being ordered here and like passing through here and pointing it out on a map and blah blah blah, but like firsthand accounts of like what's going down, like it's just I don't think it didn't exist. It's just crazy that so much of it has been lost to time.
I'm just wondering what the literacy rates would have been with the basic enlisted men or seafarers in that case.
But even officers, like I know you were saying like Revolutionary War era sort of like paperwork records are, can be skeptical, or what's the word I'm looking for? Sketchy, or incomplete or missing, but like not one.
So first to the records, the problem in a lot of cases, even with our French and Indian War records, we'll have one side of the conversation. We'll have a letter or an order.
Good point.
But we don't have the reply, or it's the reply to the original letter, and you're like, well, what was he asking? What did they say? Rev War, we have, of course, letters from Colonel Rawlings, orders and different things, and different people at that level. We have there's some references in British accounts. The only quote-unquote diarist that we know of that was at Fort Frederick is this Corporal Fox. And he is there such a short time. He literally writes 2 or 3 entries. And that's why we know about the shacks for the married soldiers. So he's it. And then, like I said, all the other records are somewhat incomplete. I mean, I know somebody who was writing letters about Fort Frederick, Thomas Jefferson, when he was governor of Virginia, because he was trying to get rid of those prisoners. But, and to me, that's still cool reading these letters from these guys. It's like, wow, Thomas Jefferson is talking about my fort.
That's awesome.
That is awesome.
Unrelated, but like semi-related, when you're talking about like, initial letter or having the reply, I think that's one of the things that fascinates me so much about the Lee and Grant correspondence ahead of Appomattox surrender is like, as I read them, like it's cool because you can oftentimes, like I just came across today referencing our Q2 episode, I guess a letter that Queen Victoria wrote, a condolence letter to Mary Todd. And it's a fantastic insight into like two people sharing a similar grief, obviously different circumstances, but missing their better halves. And as I finished reading it, I was like, did Mary reply? Like, what did she say? Like,
Right.
I wanted to know that. And I'm sure that is probably something that could be found, but like my brain immediately went there. It was like, what's the other part of this? And I like that about the Lee and Grant correspondence because you get, basically Grant's like, it's time to give it up. And Lee's like, I don't know what you mean there, old boy. And like, there's some like good back and forth, but you get to see both halves of this conversation bringing us to this moment at Appomattox. And it's, I got to imagine like you're describing it, probably it's like super frustrating when you're sitting there holding like a letter from Rawlings, but you don't know like what was said to him or prompted his whatever. And it's like trying to fish and like you just can't connect the bait to the hook. You're like, it's all here. I have the worm. Like,
Fort Frederick is frustrating in that respect. Our French and Indian War story is incomplete. Our Rev War story is incomplete. I mean, we don't know what the fort actually looked like. I mean, we know what the fort looked like because it's still there. But I mean, like the buildings and stuff exactly. But we know that the Governor Sharp, sent out at least 5 copies of the plans. But we've never been able to locate them. And then when there was the build-up to the Forbes campaign, he sends it to St. Clair. Somebody in there. draws a map of Fort Frederick and its environs, and they discuss that where they mention that their wells and their magazines and flats, which are storehouses, outside the fort. And it's like, where is this? Because honestly, I would rather have that document than the plans. Like if I could only have one, because this would show me in 1758 what it all looked like, at least generally, and I would know where the village is and where all the buildings were. But none of that's been located. Or I've seen letters from George Washington in the Rev War that references Fort Frederick, but I don't know why. Like, like somebody's written and it's like, oh, it's like, what is this? What is this little gem? And that's a big thing. I mean, Rev War in some ways is very well documented, but there's so many holes because they got food more than 3 times.
Of course.
There's that there's more to the story, but some of those records are lost, incomplete,
never written.
Yeah.
One question before we time travel a little bit further ahead into the next war is, if you as a personal historian, you as a state ranger historian, or just anybody involved in the attempted and ongoing preservation and memorialization of Fort Frederick, have you guys ever looked in the British records?
Yes. I mean, not me. Well, I mean, I've looked at some stuff digitally because I've not been to England.
No,
to
of course.
that.
But I mean, I just imagine maybe there's copies.
The state's not going to pay for you to go to.
Definitely in the 70s when they were trying to rebuild, and because the plan was in the 70s was to completely restore the entire fort with bicentennial money, but they did send letters and corresponded with archives in England. It's weird reading those letters as like, no, we don't have anything. But
they're totally lying. They're just so bitter about the war.
But seeing the correspondence back and forth is kind of interesting. And then in the 90s, when they were they wanted to rebuild the governor's house, the officers' quarters, our Friends of group paid for a researcher in England to go through archives and came up with nothing. And of course, we have no idea if they
truly came up with nothing.
Yeah. So that's happened. I know that in the 30s, when the Civilian Conservation Corps was there, the National Park Service did some inquiries at different places. I don't know if they contacted England, but I know that they were at least across the country. Had referenced the archaeologist that was involved with the project was like, yeah, we've talked to all these different, or sent letters to all these different places. So people have tried. And again, there are little threads that keep coming out. I figure that our plans and stuff are some DAR hall somewhere that no one knows about, or it could be in an unfiled file in the state archives.
I want to, like, this. My curious brain is just totally fascinated by what records lie not just hidden in like state archives or DAR archives, but like what is in the British archives about this? Because a few years ago, I was watching a documentary about the Battle of the Somme, and it was like a mind-blowing thing. This guy was like, we haven't actually looked at the German records about this. And I was like, well, that's kind of dumb. They're pretty accessible. But in that research, they found out that like 2 Irish, bitter Irish troops had been captured and like had low-key betrayed that the attack was coming. Now, what that intelligence did for the Germans is highly debatable, but like it was interesting to see that there was this pre-July 1st reference to like the Germans were like, yeah, we know it's coming. Like they knew it. And I was like, wow. Like, and I think that was discovered in like in the last 20 years. And I want to say more recent, like I think 2016. But I just was fascinated by like, that's sitting in somebody else's records. And like, you're talking about all these copies, and like Governor Sharp had been asking for money, and like the legislature here is still a colonial legislature, so they're probably still communicating further over back to the crown. So like, I wonder how much of the records here exist over there.
Some of it, I'm sure, does. I know that with the Sharp's correspondence in the Maryland archives, he has the letters, most of the letters back and forth from England. Like it's funny because you'll read something 3 times and think it's 3 different things, and you realize, oh wait, he's written the same thing to 3 different people slightly differently.
Yeah. All right, personal appeal to future King of England, Prince William. When you become the king, can you just, holler at your boys over here and send us what you got relating to Fort Frederick? Appreciate you. Thank you, sir. All right, we're going to jump ahead to 1861. but I want you not just to like act like nothing happened between the end of the Revolution and now. So in 3 minutes or less, how do we go from the end of the war, Treaty Paris is signed, we are the American nation that we live in now, and all right, before we go right in that, what happens to all the prisoners, like when it's decided that like this is no longer going to be used? Do we just say go home?
They are marched to New York because New York is the last place to sort of surrender in a way. I mean, the surrenders, the pieces happen, but they're still there in New York City. They're in New York City, and they get on boats, and they're sent back to England.
Do we just stand there with double middle fingers as they sail away? Like,
There's estimated 120,000 people flee the former colonies.
Correct. Yes, there's a massive exit of Americans as well, and there's a fair number of British soldiers who stay here, and there's a bigger number of Germans that stay here.
Yeah.
But most of them go back to England, and they basically. I actually think we might even have footed the bill for them to go.
so when are they marched out of Fort Frederick?
I don't have an official date.
Give us a window.
I would say it's sometime in late 1782, early 1783. Again,
You think they're marched out before the treaty is signed, like the official war-ending treaty?
possibly, but just because I know that the conditions there are supposedly so bad, and the records of them being there become less and less, they may have been marched out earlier to Frederick and to Lancaster and stuff. But again, I can't say exactly when they left, but I do know that at some point they do start sending people to different locations.
So what happens to the fort then once the prisoners are out? Obviously we're talking the 1780s and the Civil War in the frame of the 143 wars that we kind of frame this program in. So like what happens sort of in the time between the conflicts?
You wanted 3 minutes. I can do it in 30 seconds. So this
I
is
mean,
great.
I just, I want to,
Well, but
because
that's-
we're running out of time and I want to make sure that we get the Civil War
And
stuff
that's-
without being rushed.
And that's the thing. So nothing. The state sells the property in about 1791. It becomes farmland, and it goes through a couple different owners up until just before the Civil War.
So there's just a big ass stone fort sitting there and people are just mowing the grass and planting
They
stuff
start
around it.
to do that 5-finger discount again with it.
The 5-finger discount definitely takes place as well. A guy by the name of John Stone owns it into the probably the first, up until about 1850, I guess. But yeah, nothing really happens besides people start taking stuff and there's agricultural pursuits. 1850 is a big year. A guy by the name of Nathan Williams starts living on the property. Nathan Williams is a freedman of color.
Yes.
Yep.
Nathan Williams had been born enslaved in Virginia. His father purchased him and his family out of slavery in the 1820s. His father then, which I think is interesting, makes Nathan work for him as an indentured servant to pay off the money that he paid for him his freedom. So he lived with his dad until he was like 20-something. His father ends up buying what's known as Prather's Neck on the C&O Canal. Big Sam Williams, apparently he really was like 6'3", and, I hate to say it, but stereotypically I think when I keep thinking of Big Sam, I think John Henry.
Yeah.
The mythological
I could see
John
that.
Henry.
Are you sure he's 6'3"? Because if Matt finds out you're wrong, he's going to tell you.
Stop.
He's a big guy. So his father owns property nearby at Prather's Neck, which is just a few miles down the road from Fort Frederick. 1850, Nathan ends up on the property. I think it's 1847. He purchases wife's freedom. Amy, actually her name's Annie, but for some reason they ever called her Amy. I don't know why. Tombstone says Annie, but she was known as Amy. I've never asked the family that one, and I need to. I know I'm still in touch with some of the relatives of the family.
Nice. Oh, cool.
Which is really cool. So he gets the property 1850. He's there renting, I think, at this point. 1860, he buys the fort and about 100 acres. $5,000 if you read one court document, $7,000 if you read another court document.
That's a lot of money in
Yes.
1850-ish money.
Yeah.
So two things. He has a mortgage, which people always ask, how did he pay for it? He had a mortgage,
So he's paying it off.
and he's paying it off, and he had a cosigner. And in his case, it's a guy who appears to be a local, somewhat wealthy white man, who is the co-signer on his loan, on his mortgage.
Sure.
According to his family, though, he pays it off in 7 years.
I mean, got to be good ground, agricultural. John Buford would be like, "This is good.
It's good ground." And it is referenced as a very prosperous farm, and one of the best in the county. So he's there, 1860, 1861. Civil War breaks out. Here is a family. He has 8 children. I don't know if he has all 8 by 1860, but he's going to have 8 children. But he's got some children at the time. He actually owns a slave. And I should rephrase that. Is he purchases the papers of a young man, but the plan is to manumit him when he's 21.
Okay.
Do you know when he purchases the individual?
57, I believe.
I mean, sorry, I meant to ask you, do we know how old the person was when he was purchased?
15, I believe. And the reason that he does this is he needs help on the farm because his kids are too young at the outbreak of the war. So he's got a wife dealing with some very young children, baby to a couple years old. He needs help on the farm. So he gets. So
I'm just
guy.
trying to make sense of this. I'm not trying to make light of it. So if you're listening out there and you think I'm making light of this, I apologize. I'm just trying to make sense of this. So when he's purchasing this man, and I don't like to speculate intent, but like, is he purchasing this guy with the like, look, I'm not going to treat you like a bastard. You're basically going to work here and like help me. And like when you're 21, you can go your own way, kind of thing. Or,
Yeah,
is there like a preset? Like he's told you're going to go free?
Yes, yeah, it's in the documents in the papers.
So he essentially buys an enslaved individual and like turns him into more of an indentured servant.
Correct. I think he does exactly what his dad did to him.
Okay.
His dad purchases him and says, "Hey, buddy, you got to help.
Well, it's the example he's worked with.
You got to pay your way."
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, I'm just trying to understand the dynamic.
So he is oddly, technically, Nathan Williams is a slaveholder. He may, I've still struggled with trying to figure out exactly if he purchased his wife's freedom from her owner. I hate to say that nobody owns anybody.
I mean, it's, dude, what do we agree? If you're talking about history and you're not uncomfortable ever, you're not doing it right. And two, like, this is this is the time.
Right. And so I don't know if he purchases her freedom outright from the neighbor, because she was on a neighboring farm, or if he purchases her slave papers.
Similar to how he was in this other young man.
So he's, in a way, he's an odd duck, but if you look at what he's trying to do, he's working within the confines of the system that he's been given in order to eventually potentially manumit some people.
Certainly.
Yeah.
So Nathan Williams is there, war breaks out, got the family, oddly enough, the boy's name is Nathan Carl. We don't know if he took Nathan's name because, I don't know. War breaks out. Where Nathan Williams' house is literally a half a mile from the Potomac River, actually half a mile from the shore of what's now Confederate Virginia.
Right.
On the border of Berkeley and Morgan counties, across the river. You can't get much more on the border than Nathan Williams' farm. Civil War, another hot take. It's about slavery.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
we established that day one. We agree.
Yeah, there's some other stuff, but that's the big one.
Yeah, no slavery, no war. Sorry.
Exactly.
So here you have a freed man living on a farm on the border of the war. Of course, the war starts, and as I call it, it's almost like in that area of Maryland, it's almost like the phony war.
Yes, Matt loves this term.
It's almost a phony war. I called it play war at one time.
Sure.
Because like there's a couple of instances locally of like local militia groups like stealing the ferry boat. Like going over the other side and stealing the ferry boat.
Screw with the other side.
Yeah. So there's all this little tit for tat, and of course First Manassas happens in July, the big kind of kerfuffle in the area,
And then Ball's Bluff.
and everything sort of starts settling down into northern Virginia along the Potomac. Well, the initial Union strategy is we protect the entire length of the freaking river. So they will eventually put small groups of troops at every ferry crossing, every ford, along the canal, so every canal lock, every bridge, all the way along there. And technically they're protecting the B&O Railroad from the north bank of the Potomac, which of course
Right.
the B&O was in Confederate Virginia at the time, at least in this section.
Yeah.
So in the fall, winter of 1861, they start sending troops out towards Fort Frederick. There's a few good little tidbits that happen. There's a skirmish on park property across from the mouth of the of Back Creek, where the Union 1st Virginia Infantry, and let me think, December. Matt, do you know the date?
Thought it was Christmas.
No, not this time. This is
Okay.
before
This
Christmas.
is before the Christmas skirmish?
Yeah, let me check my.
Because the Christmas skirmish is 1st Maryland. I think that's Potomac Home Brigade or 1st Maryland
First Maryland.
outright.
It's 1st Maryland outright because they've got a bunch of Virginia
Isn't
guys
some of
who've
the
come over.
7th Maryland there too?
Maybe at one point.
Yeah, hold on. Let me find it here. I've got it. I gotta make sure I get the right.
Real time
Yeah.
fact check.
So December 6th, 1861, Company D of the 1st Virginia Infantry, USA, was involved in the skirmish at Back Creek. And the Federals, the Union troops, were on the opposite river, opposite the mouth, which is actually on undeveloped park property. And they were fired on by Confederate infantry. Nobody was hurt, at least on the Union side. I think that the Confederates were potentially trying to disrupt the bridge. There's a B&O railroad bridge there. The Union troops of this 1st Virginia is kind of interesting because I have just forgotten his first name. It was Lincoln's bodyguard, Lamon. Come on.
Ward Hill
Ward
Layman?
Hill.
Ward Hill,
Yep,
that's it.
yep.
I was going to say James Ward, and I was like, that's
No,
not right.
it's
Ward
Ward
Hill
Hill.
Lamon. It's his unit. The 1st Virginia is this sort of understrength, loyal West Virginian Maryland unit. They will eventually become the 3rd Maryland U.S. Infantry.
Woo!
That's right. That's a shout out for Matt there because that's his group. So they end up doing that. So there's this little skirmish, and that's reported. And of course, Lamon is a pretty famous dude even at this point. He's been Lincoln's bodyguard,
He's a
or he's
big
going to
boy.
be, and he's a big dude. Yeah. So this little skirmish happens again. Not much there, but that's the first thing in December. December is a busy month at Fort Frederick. So I think it's the 18th.
We just name dropped
16th.
him, and I just realized we didn't really talk about him at all in the whole Lincoln assassination. His absence is a huge thing that people like to talk about. I mean,
Right.
he lives with that guilt the rest of his life.
Right.
So we'll probably revisit that at some point. Ward Hill Layman's story in and of itself is fascinating.
So then the local commander on the 16th, who I believe is Colonel Leonard, I think he's 13th Massachusetts maybe is his regiment. He's kind of got troops throughout the area. He sends 2 cannon to Fort Frederick. And this incident is kind of cool because if you look at the historical record at period newspapers, this was headline news.
Yes.
Of course, there's not a whole lot going on in the war, but this is headline news. So Colonel Leonard sends up 2 cannons to Fort Frederick. We believe they're from the 1st Pennsylvania Light Artillery, Battery F. And quote from the newspaper source, let's see, the Baltimore American and Commercial Advertiser from December 17th, 1861. Quote, in order to give the force, the Confederates, returning by railroad a raking, 3 shots were fired, hitting the engine. The train, however, had no Confederate troops on board, but those in charge of the train betook themselves to a secure place in hot haste. It's ascertained that the train was bound for Paxton Cut for railroad iron. And this is reported in several papers, like picked up by, I don't know if the Associated Press was a thing yet, but kind of that thing. The news wires, the news services picked up. And I found variations of the story, I think as far away as Cincinnati.
Nice.
So this is big news. So this cannon, literally these 2 cannons are shooting at a train, hit it in the steam drive, and basically blow it up. Not a big explosion like fire, but big steam release, and the guys on the train are like, yeah, we're getting the heck out of Dodge.
And the guys, the gunner's like, gotcha.
Gotcha, yeah. Now,
Bingo.
also during this time, Stonewall Jackson is at a little place called Dam Number 5.
Yep.
Trying to disrupt the C&O Canal. So again, activity is up in the area. He's partially successful in damaging canal, but it was a disaster. And I'm a Stonewall guy, but the Dam Number 5 trip was worthless. Just caused more death for them. So because Jackson comes to dam number 5 and he's threatening, they think, to cross, because I think he even tries to build a pontoon bridge
He does.
at Williamsport or near Williamsport, and at least as a feint to draw troops away from what he's really doing. So on the 18th, Company H of the 1st Maryland Infantry U.S., yeah, they're Marylanders on both sides. There we go. The ultimate border fence
there we
sitters
go.
are sent to, quote, Old Fort Frederick. These troops are at Fort Frederick from the 18th of December until January 7th, 1861, from this company. Now, the other companies, the first, are stationed along the river at Four Locks, Dam number 5, Cherry Run, and McCoy's Ferry. So literally every place that there's something
61
to defend.
or 62?
61. We're still in the winter, December 61.
Oh, I thought you said January. Sorry, that's why I was like, wait, we
No, they're
traveled
there.
before
So
Sumter?
they're there. So December of 61 to January of 7th of 62.
62. Okay, cool.
So then, and I don't know why this is such a thing, but on December 25th, 1861, there's a skirmish at Fort Frederick between the men of Company H, the 1st Maryland, and potentially, I believe, Turner Ashby's cavalry, which would be the 7th Virginia. Could be some militia involved, Virginia militia, but potentially Ashby's cavalry. Ashby's cavalry is probably trying to tear up the railroad tracks opposite of Fort Frederick. The Union troops are probably stationed near the riverbank, and they exchange fire back and forth. For years, that's kind of, we just knew that was a skirmish. That was it. Oops, sorry.
Aren't there confirmed Confederate casualties in this skirmish? Don't they take one or two of them down? Because I think you told me that once, and my question was like, why didn't they go get them and see who they were?
That's a great question. And I think part of it just got to do with, is it worth
Getting
going
across
over
the
there?
river? No.
So this skirmish takes place. There's also one at Cherry Run, one also at Dam number 5. Like, why aren't these guys celebrating Christmas? I don't care if you're at war. Go away.
Hey, we only do that during the First World War? Okay, we only stop war to hang out once.
I'd have been. I love Christmas, so I'd have been pretty pissed
I
if
would
they'd have
be
made me
too.
fight a battle that day.
True or false? Fort Frederick, the surrounding town, I don't know if it's Big Pool or whatever, but the surrounding civilian population is kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Like they're a good microcosm of these split loyalties of Maryland. Because isn't there a good section of the town that's like when they're referencing that skirmish, they're like, yeah, we got them, but they're meaning like Turner Ashby's guys, and then there's like a bunch being like, what do you mean we? You mean Company H?
Yeah, so a local diarist, oh my God, what his name just escaped me.
I'm gonna if it's Jacob Engelbrecht.
No, it's not.
No, it's
I know. You know what I mean?
Oh, I just forgot his name. But that's okay. The local diarist, he lives in Virginia, and he's the one that writes some of the pro-Confederate stuff.
Okay.
So he's living closer to Hedgesville, about 4 miles or so away from the fort in Virginia.
Out near the woods?
Yes, between the woods and Hedgesville. Yeah.
Yeah.
Johnsonstown area.
I got some family in the woods in Hedgesville area.
So he's out there. It's going to kill me. I can't remember his name. I've only read the book about 7 times.
Get his name right. We'll talk about it in the next episode.
So yeah, he writes all the pro-Southern stuff, but we never really had a good account. And again, it's not a great account, but one day I stumbled on a letter, and this was from a guy by the name of Reverend Samuel Bookman, who appears to be part of the artillery unit, but he's also apparently either a pastor or a lay speaker because he preaches a sermon on New Year's Day that gets published as a newspaper story. But he talks about the skirmish on the 25th, and this is what he says. Samuel Bookman wrote, a short time after their arrival, the 1st Maryland, they encountered a body of rebel cavalry on the opposite side of the river. A brisk fire was kept up for some time, which resulted in the killing and wounding of some 5 or 6 of the enemy, leaving our men unhurt. Now, again, he's slightly biased because he's a Union artilleryman, and he's pro-Union, of course. Right. But he's a guy, and he's from the local area, too, so I would think he is a pretty good source. So, you were talking about our men. Here you go. It's Elijah Manor as the Southern diarist. He writes, our men, the Confederates, fired at the Yankees yesterday at Cherry Run. And then he says 30 Confederate cavalry go to Cherry Run. Ashby has 160 troopers in Hedgesville. So that's one of the reasons we think it's Ashby's guys, because he's talking about their movements in the same area at the same time. But yes, our men.
It just sticks out. You're like, oh, you wanted to say that, huh?
Yeah. So, and then things get quiet for a minute, at least right at Fort Frederick, but January 1st, New Year's Day. Hey, guys, there shouldn't be a war going on. Everybody should be excited. It's a new year.
Yeah.
But no, there's a second skirmish at Fort Frederick. Well, technically a third skirmish now at Fort Frederick, and then fourth if you count the artillery engagement.
Right.
So, again, we go back to Samuel Bookman. He says, a group of rebels were discovered on the railroad track in the mouth of Paxton's Cut, 1.5 miles distant, when a shell from a Union Parrott gun was discharged, which fell on the tracks and exploded, creating quite a panic amongst them and causing them to retrace their steps more rapidly than they advanced. And this was also picked up by the news services, as there's variations of the story and a little more to it that come from the other places. And this is the one that, let me find it. Detachments of the 13th Massachusetts and 1st Maryland participated in the repulse and rout of the Confederate forces. Our men killed and buried 29 of the enemy, and it is supposed many afterwards died of their wounds. Our loss is reported by private sources to have been 5 wounded and none killed. So, again, and this, I could read some other details, but we don't need them, but because you can actually find some of this online if you look at like the Harper's Weeklies and different things. There's several variations of this story out there. So this, again, not a lot going on in the bigger war, at least not in the East. So this was picked up and was big news. 29 Confederates. I mean, if that's true, that's still a small skirmish. It's not Gettysburg, but
No, but for the time, that's a huge. And also, where are they buried? Like, are they buried in proximity to the fort? Like, so there's also maybe now Confederate dead on the fort property?
No, they would be on, again, all this activity is pretty much the Confederates are on the south bank of the Potomac. They
so we're shooting across the river
shooting
at each
across
other?
the river at each other, yes. A la sort of Fredericksburg-y.
Okay.
We're shooting across the river at each other. There never seems to be any actual Confederate movement, at least at this time.
Well, they said they buried them
Yeah, the Union troops end up going. I think the Union troops cross.
into Virginia.
Yeah, I think maybe
why
after
bother bringing them back over?
after it's over.
That
So-
makes sense.
So they're probably buried under the B&O Railroad or the CSX now.
Sure.
So that's really Fort Frederick's sort of claim to fame. But the Maryland campaign comes up, and as I like to mention when I do Civil War program, every major campaign in Maryland, the Gettysburg campaign, the Antietam campaign, the Monocacy campaign, there are troop movements and activities, maybe not right at the fort, but within view or within earshot of throughout the war. And you have a problem with places like Cherry Run being sort of the local railroad stop, and it's Cherry Run on both sides of the river, and it's like, well, which is it? Who's doing what? So, but again, no major battles. Those are kind of it. The 1st Pennsylvania actually puts Fort Frederick on their guidon as a battle honor.
Really?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's really cool to see it in gold leaf on a
That's awesome.
on a flag. I think that Fort Frederick may be listed on the 1st Maryland Monument at Gettysburg.
Oh my
I
God.
have to double check.
If it's not listed on the monument, it was listed in the program when they dedicated the monument.
Oh, we can find that pretty easy.
Yeah.
What sort of, so like, I don't think we skipped it intentionally, but when Civil War soldiers start to inhabit this area again, this fort has fallen into disrepair.
Yes.
So like, what is, like, you sent me a great like sketch, I guess, of it. Like, can you kind of describe what the fort's going to look like as they're there, and then sort of as the Civil War leaves Fort Frederick behind? Because I know they don't leave it behind, because I know, like you just said, we have campaigns in 62, 63, and 64 where they're getting within visual sight. I actually have a follow-up question to that in a minute, but, can you kind of describe the derelict nature of the fort in 61?
Sure. So we know from some stories written in the 1850s, they did these excursions on the railroad to get people to travel by rail. And they stopped by, and that there's the drawings that you've seen and I've showed you are from those articles. Basically, the wall's there. It's covered in ivy. There are trees growing. You can still see the foundations of the buildings. I know in one place they talk about a heap of stones in one corner. So it's a ruin.
Yeah.
It's a true ruin.
Yeah.
Now, mind you, a lot of it is still there, and they make reference to how good a shape it kind of is in terms of the integrity of the
Like
of
the
the wall.
stone
Yeah,
structure.
but the fort is not a fort anymore. It's a stone wall.
Okay.
So,
One that actually lasts, though, because it's still around today?
correct. Now, we do know that there's a vague reference to the bank barn that Nathan Williams built in the north, out of the northwest bastion, being there at the time. So he's done some damage for his own purposes, using the stone to make one of those sort of typical Pennsylvania bank barns that
Yep.
you see in Gettysburg and around Antietam, Monocacy, those places. If you've been in the battlefield, you'll know them.
Yep.
So it's not in great shape. According to Samuel Bookman, the Union troops are actually camped on the 1st Maryland inside of the walls of Fort Frederick. They've set up their tents, but I always like to say it makes sense. The military likes things that are linear. They like straight lines. And what makes a really nice windbreak?
A big flat stone
Big
wall.
flat stone wall. So the troops apparently are camped in there. We also know that the officers of the 1st Maryland are staying in the Williams home. Right? Because we know that Nathan Williams' wife is feeding them. She's cooking for the officers.
So they're in the home too.
Yes. And this is a pretty common practice because Nathan Williams' house is a 2-story house. Usually what happens is family goes upstairs, officers take the downstairs, and there's a guard placed at the steps. That's kind of a
convenient.
usual, yeah. And so she's feeding them. So they're there. There's a pretty good indication based on other accounts and on the fact that there was artillery there that Union soldiers knocked a hole in the fort wall in order to fire the cannon at.
This is the hidden gun, right?
This is the hidden gun. Now for years that everybody's like, I don't think that's true. But literally one of these newspaper accounts talks about a masked battery at Fort Frederick. Well, what is a masked battery? That means it's hidden.
Hidden battery, yeah.
They talk about the Union soldiers being well entrenched. Now, is that just hyperbole, because they were really good at embellishing things? Or are they really entrenched in and around the walls of the fort?
I think it
Or
comes
just
down.
being behind the walls.
Right,
Yeah.
correct.
So I think it boils down to like something that I came across in Leesburg. They have a so there's a development, because obviously all of Leesburg's built up a lot and continuously so, but they have Confederate Fort Evans. It's preserved on private property there. Not any structures or powder magazines, but you can see it's an earthen fort, so you can absolutely see.
Yeah,
remember we went there.
absolutely.
You can
It's a really
see
cool place.
The walls and parapets and things. But off site, there's a support artillery position that kind of covers the blind spot, and it's labeled as the masked battery. And one of the things that we learned was sometimes things got called the masked battery just because the people being fired upon couldn't see it.
Right.
Like the gun could have just
Exactly.
been sitting out in the open, but they never ID'd where it was coming from, so they're just like, oh, shit. But I think this one is cooler because there is some sort of cloakiness to it, because I think they're wheeling the gun out, firing it, and then it's coming back through the hole.
That's the assumption. And here's the other catch. Now, mind you, there's some time elapses, but 1857, 58 images of the fort, no hole in the wall. The next image that we know of the fort, 1877, hole in the wall.
All right.
So what happened between 57 and 77?
was a
Civil
war.
War, but could it be something else? But again, the masked battery, the fact that they talk about this Paxton's Cut, it's almost directly across from where the hole in the wall is. Typically, a field gun needs to be in the field so you can move it around. But the hole is almost exactly 3 feet in a circle, and it's almost exactly, it is exactly at the height for a field gun to go through the hole.
So where on, like if we were to visit the park today, where do we speculate that location on the wall is?
So if you're looking at the fort wall from outside the gate, you're walking up at the fort, it's to the left of the gate about 12 feet over. It's hard to see now, more so because we just had work done to the wall there, but you can make it out. It's a little easier kind of to see on the inside, but yeah, it's
So is
it
that
was there.
something you could tangibly probably connect to still? That's kind of cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Last couple things about the Civil War. So the other campaigns you mentioned coming across. So 62, October, there's a detachment of Illinois Cavalry. The regiment suddenly escapes me. 12th Illinois Cavalry. And they are stationed at the drawbridge on the canal south of Old Fort Frederick. The drawbridge ain't there today, but you still cross that same exact location and go down to our campground across the canal, and the abutments for where that bridge was is still there. And it was actually a lift bridge.
Ooh.
Or no, I'm sorry, it wasn't a lift bridge. It was a pivoting bridge.
Okay.
Sorry, it was a pivoting bridge with a arched walkway, so you could always walk over the bridge.
Neat.
But if you needed a wagon or a horse across, it pivoted so the boats could go into the big pool.
That's cool.
So those guys are there.
Is that why they call it Big Pool, Maryland?
Correct.
Nice.
Because there's a 2-mile-long lake.
Dot connected.
Yeah. So early October, there's a guy by the name of Jeb Stewart.
Oh, never heard of him.
Yeah,
Was his name in the papers?
His name was in the papers. He crosses the Potomac
Yep.
at McCoy's Ferry and starts a ride up into Pennsylvania. It's more or less his first ride around McClellan, right?
Second.
Ride,
That's the second ride
around
62,
McClellan.
right?
Yeah, 60.
Yeah.
Sorry, second ride around McClellan.
Both are in 62.
Well, I'm sorry. Maryland campaign era is
Right.
60 is what I meant. Is the second ride.
So he crosses at McCoy's Ferry, and these guys from the 12th Illinois Cavalry, maybe some of our guys that are at Fort Frederick, and they may have seen some other activity, but these guys from the 12th Illinois, that regiment, parts of it, try to block Stewart at basically the crossroads of what's today Route 56 and McCoy's Ferry Road, or at Green Spring Furnace Road, which you really can't take anymore, thanks I-70. But you
Jerk.
can roughly
Loser.
follow Stewart's path on the original roads. They're just a little cut up because you can't go across 70 in all the spots. But they try to check his advance, and they basically, in some accounts, it's a 3-hour running skirmish. He tries to check them, and eventually they retreat to Clear Spring, and I think Stewart captures the Federal Signal Station up on top of North Mountain. But so that unit, although I don't know if there's a handful of guys at Fort Frederick are involved, but that unit does try to stop, and it is a time when there's actually fighting, at least shots exchanged between, what Stewart's got like 5,000 troopers or.
It's not that big.
Is it not that big now?
No, what's interesting is that the papers are saying it's that big, but when you actually look at the orders, it's about 1,200 guys.
You know what? That's right now that you said that.
Big scary Jeb Stewart.
But still, 1,200 guys,
Cavaliers, yeah.
and you figure that maybe a company, roughly a couple squads of a federal cavalry regiment's trying to hold them up.
Right.
Yeah.
It's something. So there's a connection there. We definitely have troops from that unit there. I don't know if they saw activity against Stewart himself, but sometimes we've commemorated that activity at the fort, that action. And again, there are other times, after Gettysburg campaign, I believe it is, there's some Union troops, probably the end of their line is in our campground today, waiting to cross over the river because they still had the same problem Lee had. Lee couldn't get across because the river was up, and then when Lee finally got across, they waited because they're like, well, we don't want to try to cross the river and get cut to shreds.
Right, just run over.
Yeah. So they're there in the area. So there's a lot of little things beyond that. But the winter of 61, 62 is sort of the big time, sort of in terms of activity. One more interesting related story, Nathan Williams. So he pays off his mortgage in 7 years. So about 1866. His family reports that he's paid off his mortgage because of his activities during the war.
So they've been paying him for use of the home or the fort?
No, he's not getting a lease. He's a farmer.
Oh,
He's
they're buying
selling
his crops.
So the Union soldiers are buying his goods, his crops and whatever. He is also going across into Confederate Virginia selling his goods to the Confederates.
Clever guy.
Cheeky bastard.
He may also then be coming back and telling the Union Army what he sees in Virginia.
Sure.
Oh, man.
And probably getting some money for that. Now, the best part of the story, though, is at one time there was some concerns about his loyalty. He goes over to Virginia with his wagon full of goods to sell to the Confederates. And a Union, quote, intelligence officer, I don't know what, that's how the family, describes it over the years, but somebody who's going to wants to question him, because there really wasn't an intelligence branch.
Not until 63.
Yeah. Comes to the fort to find him, and he's not there.
Was that Sharp?
Yes.
Yeah.
Bureau of Military Information.
A local gentleman whose name escapes me, old white guy, whose name, like I said, escaped me, but he lived right off of or right on the same property, or right off of the Williams' property, goes over to Virginia and tells him, don't come home. They want to arrest you. So he goes over to Virginia, apparently leaves his wagon. I guess he probably leaves his wagon, gets on the horse or whatever, and he rides all the way down, I think, to Williamsport and crosses and then comes back to try to avoid being questioned. He ends up being questioned, not arrested, and But that's, yeah, so he does get questioned, his loyalty does get questioned, but apparently he is also getting information to the Union and as well as selling goods to the Union and the Confederates.
Did they know about what year of the war that would have been?
It's the sort of the family
Legend. Okay.
legend story. I totally believe it. But there's no date.
Now, there's so much federal cavalry running around in that area, and they're being used for intelligence gathering a lot.
Yeah.
So.
And there's no war claims made about destruction of the property. Like if federal soldiers did knock the hole in the wall, that's his property.
Not that I know of. And a lot of those claims don't get paid out anyways, but I don't know much about there being a claim. But it's an interesting thing. And I also think it's interesting, because I've had some people asking, as you think about what were the Confederates, what were their orders when they came across black people when they were in the North, particularly?
Yeah, we're going to grab you and
Grab 'em
sell
up.
you back down south.
So and again, this is my theory, most of the Confederate troops that are typically around the Hedgesville, Martinsburg area are local troops. Several times it's the 2nd Virginia Infantry, which are all from there's several companies from Hedgesville, Martinsburg area. I think because Nathan Williams grew up,
He knows them.
he actually, because at first he lived before his dad bought him out of slavery, lived apparently in the Martinsburg area. And then lived there at Prather's Neck, and then lived at that area, and there's commerce and whatnot going. Yeah, I think he knows them, and he's just
Running under the radar.
Yeah, he's our guy. We know him. He's I don't know what terminology to use because I don't want to say he's their friend, but they know him. He's okay.
Yeah.
He's okay, and I think that's how he gets away with a lot of what he's potentially getting away with because he knows people, he knows the area, he knows how to get around. But I just think that's kind of a cool story because it makes sense. He pays off his bills right after the war because how many people are paying off their bills right after the war?
Nobody.
Yeah.
Because the government's not stroking checks.
Right. Yeah, there's no stimulus package.
All right.
Yeah.
So wrapping up here. So one of my favorite things about doing the physical 143 Wars Living History is obviously the visual. So, when the fort's back open, and we're going to get there in a second here, but when the fort's back up and running and you get to do that program again, I can't encourage you enough to follow along with the Friends of Fort Frederick on Facebook so you can kind of see what's going on. But when they do this event, it's fantastic to see the living history approach to this, where you got guys dressed up in provincial uniforms, you got guys dressed up as redcoats and American Continental soldiers, and then we have guys representing Confederate and Federal soldiers during the Civil War, and it's cool to see so much history taking place in such a condensed period of time. We're talking less than 100 years. It's one of my favorite programs to do just because of the amount of the first time I did it with you, I gave a program. I was talking about artillery and heavy artillery, which to be clear, there was no heavy artillery ever stationed there, but Rob has a whole fort. It's an awesome opportunity to talk about other forts too. But I remember my favorite part of that event was when my program was done. I just kind of got to walk around and listen to all these other fascinating. I'll be honest. I know a decent bit about the Revolution. I know practically nothing about the French and Indian War other than what we've kind of talked about on this show. So I love this program, and when we wanted to have you on here, I just immediately was like, this is the chat, because it's a good way to introduce people to this fort. It's 3 topics that people are either loosely or intimately aware of, but it covers the spectrum, and there's names everybody knows attached to this whole thing, and there's cool stories, there's speculated stories. It's just, there's so much revolving around this place, and most people have never heard of it. Think about everything we've talked about, and I bet you the majority of the listeners were like, holy crap, we've talked about George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and General Braddock and Turner Ashby and all these other Civil War names and things like that, and you probably never heard of that place until today. So all those people did, and they talked about it, and that's fantastic. So as we're leaving Fort Frederick at the Civil War, obviously the fort continues. It lives today. You interpret the site. So before we wrap up with what's in store for the fort this summer, since we're coming back to life in the state of Maryland and here in the United States, the fort's in disrepair. It's a ruin, as you said, by the time the Civil War rolls around. The war ends. What happens?
Well, it's interesting, and I really will make a long story short, because I found this one day. I thought it was interesting. There was a movement early on to try to do something with the fort. And when I say early on, in the middle of the Maryland campaign, the Maryland legislature is talking about forming a subcommittee to explore the idea of reacquiring Fort Frederick for the state of Maryland.
For military use at the time, or just general, like, we're already thinking state parks?
I think at that point, it's literally just to be a historic site,
Oh, wow.
like historic preservation. And that comes up a little bit.
I'm impressed.
So, but that's that's like literally September of 1862. They're literally like the dates on those records. I'm like, oh my gosh, like South Mountain is happening right now.
Guys,
like
you're
Antietam
literally
is
being invaded. Don't you have better shit to talk about right now?
Exactly. So that's the first reference. And then I think we hit our centennial in 1876. And I think that's when people really started thinking about it. And it's still farmed. The Williams family is there until 1911 on the farm. Nathan dies in 1882. They actually build a schoolhouse on the property for African American children.
Is he buried on the property?
He is not buried on the property, but he's buried a few miles away near Clear Spring.
Okay,
And the
so
family's
his
all-
grave is known.
His family's all buried together. Yeah.
Okay.
So they're involved in education as well for African Americans right after the Civil War.
Awesome.
And the schoolhouse, the 1899 schoolhouse, still exists, and we're restoring it right now.
Awesome.
So yeah, they're looking at it. People are starting coming out doing historical sort of pageants and presentations and commemorations and stuff. There's some great 1880s and 90s pictures of people in their Sunday best and these handmade rickety platforms talking about Maryland history. Probably incorrectly, but talking about it nonetheless.
Giving it a shot.
Giving it a shot, yeah. 1892, the state talks about buying it again. This time they want to make it the National Guard base. They want to make it the home of the National Guard summer encampments.
Okay.
That falls through. They then continue during the, I think, 1880s, 1890s, the Fort Frederick Preservation Society is formed and chartered by the state to try to reacquire it and preserve it and everything. The Williamses end up, I think they lose it in a tax sale or a mortgage sale in 1911. Because they acquired more property over time, and so the park it got bigger. And something happened. I think it was taxes. They couldn't pay their taxes. A guy by the name of Homer Cavanaugh buys the property from them, knowing that the state's interested in it. And I think he pays. I forget what amount he pays. But in 1922, finally, the state reacquires it, and he doubles his money.
Oh, well, there you go.
The numbers, because I always think it's, because I have the number 11 and 22, and I always want to say it's 11, and he sells it. I was like, no, those are the dates, so I might have known the numbers.
Either way, marked up.
Yeah, he marked it up. The only thing that he had to do was remove the barn. Tear the barn down that's in the fort, and that was like the caveat of the deal. State buys it in 1922. The State Board of Forestry buys it. But the mission of the State Board of Forestry is not preserving historic sites or making parks. It's trees.
Preserving trees.
Preserving trees. So the Board of Forestry, along with the Daughters of the American Revolution, start planting trees at Fort Frederick, and mainly trees that are non-native to this part of Maryland or sometimes this part of the country.
Of course.
An experimental forest to see what would work at Fort Frederick. So that's sort of the start of that.
And you've been cutting them down ever since.
We have to a point. It's cool, though, because there are still parts of the original tree plantation, that are still there, and to also find, like, random trees sometimes, and they're the spawns of those trees. Like, we have loblolly pines. They don't grow here, by the way, guys. Not in Western Maryland. That's one, and we have some cypress trees in the park.
Neat.
We have several other kinds of. I think we have a cedar tree that only grows out west. That grows in our park. So we have
You have a big giant redwood. Nobody just notices this 800-foot tall tree in the middle of the park.
So that's how they got around to get it. They had to plant these trees. And the Daughters of the American Revolution was big into that. They still are. The Daughters still plant trees periodically at our park. The DAR did some things in the 30s, like they restored the Fort Well. 1934, during the grips of the Depression, the Civilian Conservation Corps shows up and spends 3 years at the park. They restore the fort walls, to the what you see today, the modern height, the height of it. They they find the foundation of the buildings. They do some very rudimentary archaeology. They build most of the buildings that we still use today, the road infrastructure. I mean,
The park as we know it today is largely a visual sort of handoff from the Civilian Conservation Corps.
yes,
correct?
absolutely. Yeah. So the CCC plays a big role. I always like to say, I thank Franklin Roosevelt for my job.
Yeah,
There you go.
there
Because
you
if the
go.
CCC wouldn't have done the work, I don't know what Fort Frederick would have ended up being. I mean, it was a park, but
You'd still be chasing the Wolfman at Catoctin Mountain around Ambrose State Park. You know it.
so that was the kind of the 30s, and that's really kind of, for the most part, for better or for worse, almost the end of the story. 70s, the barracks were rebuilt for the bicentennial. In the late 70s, early 80s, our visitor center that we have today is rebuilt or is built. But the majority of what's happened in our park, or what our park looks like today, is that thumbprint from the CCC.
You guys do a great job of interpreting that too. Not a lot of places get in touch with interpreting their CCC
No, I
history.
agree.
And a lot of national park sites and state sites and other non-historical sites have the CCC to thank for their just outright
Absolutely.
existences, but they don't talk about that. And you guys are brilliant about touching on the fact that you guys are essentially here because of the work they did in the 30s.
Right. Yeah. No. And we love the story. We have it's a very dated exhibit, but we have an exhibit about the CCC's time there. We're planning a new exhibit in our original CCC camp building that was on site, was removed, and was brought back. Basically, when they left, I guess, I don't know if the state sold them or if they said, if you can haul them away, you can have these tar paper buildings. And this one happened to survive. It was just off site right outside the park and was brought back. And we're hoping to put some exhibits in there and also use it kind of as a potential living history space to talk about the CCC era. And we've really been beefing up. I've got a trunk full of CCC dungarees and
Can you
stuff.
have a beard in the CCC?
No.
God damn it, man. Like, I want to do stuff at your park, but I love my beard.
You can have a mustache.
Yeah, dude, all right. We'll talk about it.
Although technically there were some guys involved with the CCC who are like known as local experienced men who potentially who weren't really enrollees. They sort of worked with, in some cases they were the actual skilled labor telling the kids how to do their job.
Well, and you've got construction experience.
Little-
There you go.
There you go.
You could potentially do that, but again, the 30s aren't a big beard era.
It's true.
I don't care.
I'm just saying, I don't.
What did you say earlier in the show? I live in the 21st century.
No, and I do too. In terms of that visual, it's not as to me it's not as big a deal. 18th century's a
It's when you don't want me in a turnout, like a turn. What am my brain is stopping.
Turnbacks?
Yes, and you don't want a beard there. I get
If-
that.
if
I
I-
get that.
yeah, but you know.
Even hobos shaved back then. That's what you said to me once. You were like, even the poor people found a way to shave, and I was like, so no beards? And you were like, no.
Yeah, basically,
Okay.
people who lived high in the mountains all by themselves, pirates, and people who had people
Mange.
locked in asylums.
All those, I check all those boxes. I'm crazy, and I want to be a pirate, and I would love to live on the mountain.
Although I think if
away
you're
from
Russian, you
nobody.
could get away with it too, though.
Yeah, duh. So,
Duh.
all right. So obviously, Fort Frederick has a huge and storied and obscure and mysterious history, which one of my favorite parts is knowing that you are on the case. There are a bunch of historic sites out there that don't have good ambassadors for them, and that is not the case at Fort Frederick. You are an absolutely phenomenal interpreter. You are a relentless researcher. I got to see you a couple years ago at the Hagerstown Public Library give a sort of presentation
Oh, yeah.
on the fort systems that
Yeah.
help support Fort Frederick and all these other things, and I was mystified. Just as I think we're about a half an hour in, and I was like, you've probably put 200 hours into a 30-minute program, like in terms of research and development for it. And I appreciated that because it was such a full story about a really niche thing, and you do that every day at the park. And I've said it on this show as a joke a few times, but I've known you for years, and you're still teaching me about this place. I cannot thank you enough just for being my friend and being patient and teaching me that stuff, but for doing it with people you don't know, day in and day out. You are a gem in the history world, and you are keeping a gem of a history site. So We really appreciate everything you're doing out in the field, and Matt and I absolutely, certainly appreciate you coming on the show here. So,
Absolutely.
So as we're getting out of here, what's coming up for the fort in 2021?
So 2021 is going to look a little different than
There's a shock.
2019.
Is there going to be a 2021?
Yes, absolutely. There's going to be a 2021. 2021's already started.
Nice.
We kicked off with a homeschool group that wanted to come out and do a tour back at the end of April. And I use the term tour. It's not really a tour. Our educational experience.
What are you from the
give them-
Midwest? You say tour like this guy. It's tour.
Yeah, whatever.
God damn it, man.
Tour.
I'm a Mid-Atlantic person. My
Your lexicon is jacked.
Yeah, it is. It really is. So we had a homeschool group, and that went really well. It was a modified from what we normally do. Right now, we're going to open up Memorial Day weekend, the Friday of Memorial Day weekend. The program is going to be very basic. When we have just a regular, quote-unquote, regular weekend or weekday, they're going to do a flag raising program, talk about our flag. They're going to do a couple 3 musket firing demos during the course of the day, and then a flag lowering, because they just don't have the staff to do all the stuff that we used to do.
Right.
We're hoping to get some volunteers to come in
We'll be there.
and help out and help beef up some of our regular daily stuff. Now our guys are going to be probably doing some other, basic living history stuff. They're going to be doing lots of, as I like to say, fort maintenance, lots of oiling leather goods and polishing brass and cleaning muskets and doing things that would have been done. They're mundane, polishing shoes.
Are you going to be doing that by order of the governor? Because remember your Governor Ambrose?
Yeah, no, the governor's already spoken.
Listen up, fellas. You got some guns to clean and some leathers to oil. I don't want to hear any lip.
Stuff like that. They're going to do some cooking. We'll do some cooking in the fort this year and things. We're really hoping that we get some more help. I know Memorial Day weekend we're going to have a couple extra bodies because I actually get to go play on Sunday and Monday. So I'll be in the fort with them, and my boss will be in, I think, Friday and Saturday.
Well, we'll make it out to support you this summer, so you
Yeah.
can count on that, man. You'll see me multiple times being weird on your historic site.
So fort hours.
Great description.
Will be
It's accurate.
Yeah. So the fort this year also, we usually go 7 days a week, Memorial Day to Labor Day. Got 2 employees, can't do 7 days a week this year. Might be a blessing. We'll see. I'm curious to see how this goes.
All right.
But we're going to be open Thursday through Mondays. So we're closed Tuesday, Wednesdays. But when we're open, the fort's open from 10 to 5. You'll have the interpreters there to talk to, do those few programs. You can, this year, at least for now, you're able to look into the rooms. You cannot enter the barracks like you used to. That's based on some of the COVID stuff still.
Sure.
So we're doing that. I'm really hoping to do some theme weekends. 143 Wars would be a good example of that.
Yeah.
Even just a Civil War weekend. I definitely like to pull off a 143 Wars, and I definitely want to get, because we were so close, and I had some really interested in doing a CCC theme weekend. So trying to do some of that stuff. Of course, we're going to do, even if it's just the few staff that we have, we'll be dressed out in American Rev kit during the 4th of July weekend. I have to look at the dates and see exactly how we'll fall with that. That's one of those programs that some years ends up being like a week long because the holiday falls on a Wednesday.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I guess we'll start on Friday and we'll run to the next Sunday.
We'll just talk about it until
Yeah.
we're blue in the face. Until we're red, white, and blue in the face.
There you go.
It's one of the only 2 times that we run the Stars and Stripes up in the fort. Usually we have our Fort Frederick Garrison flag, our special 1750s flag, but we'll put up the 13 stars over the fort during our 4th of July programming.
Nice.
And then if we do anything on September 11th, if we're open that late this year, again, staffing was going to be a question coming out of August. So, but I'm really hopeful, and I'm hoping that even if it's hey, First Living History Battalion, you guys want to come out and do a Civil War thing.
Yep, absolutely.
But anything that we do this year is going to be for the most part, it's going to be pretty intimate in terms of the numbers of folks we're going to have come out.
Even with an abbreviated season, it sounds like you guys are really making the effort, and that's what it's all about.
We're trying. We're even hopeful that we'll get the cannon out this year and do some artillery, but I'm not holding my breath yet.
18th century artillery.
18th century artillery. As per our historic weapons regs, we have to have 6 minimally to fire the gun, and I got to make sure I have solid commitment from some volunteers before I can make sure. I'm not going to advertise artillery and then not have it. That's a bummer.
Yeah.
So, and again, it could be, hey, we're going to do a quote. We used to call them garrison weekends. We're just doing French and Indian War, but that's not. Maybe we won't advertise it, but we'll if we have the crew. If I get the cannon out and we have enough people to crew it, we'll shoot it. But again, there's a lot of prep work involved with artillery, and I got to have a good commitment before we'll be able to get the cannon out. So that might not be in for this year. But we're definitely doing programming. We definitely want people to come out to the fort, and we're hoping to put out some press releases throughout the year saying, hey, we're doing something a little different this weekend. Come out and see it. Come out to, we used to do Pontiac's Rebellion weekend.
Sweet.
So, Mr. Michigan over here, he
Do you know Matt's from Michigan?
No.
Yeah, right?
No. But that's, it's going to be different, but things are getting better, so we're excited.
So, yeah, I imagine like Matt, similarly with his main ranger gig right now, a lot of the community, the sites, the reenactors, everybody's kind of relearning how to do this hobby in the current world we live in. So there's a lot of sites opening up slowly or quietly or smaller scale because we got to kind of flesh out what this is going to be, who's still around. Like we did witness a mass exodus from this hobby, kind of like we saw after the 150s for the Civil War wrapped up. A lot of the older guys were like, all right, I'm not going to be around in either period or like in reenacting shape for the 175. So a lot of them got out. The pandemic shut down a lot of people's reenacting careers, so there was a big exodus again. So I'm actually pumped to see all these smaller and quiet reopenings because they're going to be reimaginings and reinterpretations of how we've been teaching for a long time. So this is actually, I look at this as like a new birth for us as storytellers and keepers of these legacies to get out there. Social media is a very funky thing with the state of Maryland. Government, parks, doesn't matter. So how do people most people are using social media to stay connected these days. How do people get connected to Fort Frederick at all through social media right now?
So there's two ways. One, follow Maryland State Parks on Facebook, Twitter, I think Instagram. Also follow Maryland DNR, the Department of Natural Resources, because they also share because we are under that umbrella. So when we do stuff, we send out a press release or pictures or whatever, they'll post that stuff so you'll know. Also, the best way, I know I've got to get back into to working with them, is our Friends of Fort Frederick Facebook group. You actually have to join. It's a group.
Yep.
But for the most part, you can get in. It might not be instantaneous, but you can get in, and that's a place where we will share our events and pictures and things. Like I said, I've been a little bit absent from that, but I've also been absent from the most part from Facebook because, well,
it's a cesspool.
2020.
Yeah. You're a rise to take that year off of social media. You missed a lot and nothing all at the same time.
Yeah. So those are the ways that to follow us on social media. Again, we're not super active, partly because we don't control it.
Right.
So it's different. It's a different setup than a lot of places because we don't have an on-site social media manager. Like apparently the national parks are apparently like most sites or some sites have somebody that's what they do.
Matt gets to do a lot of that for Monocacy. I'm friends with Liz at Manassas who kind of handles that.
Yeah.
So park to park, I guess they get to do that. In the States, they're just like, screw you. It's one person in Annapolis who handles everything. That's probably not true where they are,
wild.
but they do that.
It is kind of that way, yeah. It's interesting. I mean, and it's not hard. It's just an extra layer.
Yeah.
And I miss when we had our own park Twitter, and I get that Twitter's mainly for people yelling about politics, but I liked when I was the morning duty ranger and I saw turtles on the pond on the log sunning themselves, and I could take a picture and post it to Twitter. I don't feel like. It feels like more work, like, I got to send this picture to so-and-so with a cap where I could just and do it. But hey, it is what it is. But yeah, you definitely can get see what's going on. And please if you're interested in parks and the history of our parks, there's stuff out there on these forums as well.
For volunteering and stuff like that, can people use the same social medias to sort of like sign up for volunteer work, or how would they go about volunteering at the park?
The best way to do is to, unfortunately, because it's a cumbersome URL, Google, or use your favorite search engine if you still Yahoo.
Don't be that old. Matt's like, I still use Netscape, guys.
Dude, thanks.
Google Fort Frederick State Park, and you'll find our website. Should be the first thing that comes up. There's information on there about volunteering and how to sign up for that, or just drop us an email. There's a general inquiry email address on there, so feel free to drop us a line if you're interested, and we'll go from there.
All right, so getting out of here tonight. One, you want to come back and do a follow-up? Want to talk more about this? Because I have so many of my own questions. I know the listeners are going to have their own questions. Like, you ready to do this again in a few weeks?
Yeah,
Yeah,
why not?
you sound super committal to that. You want to try that one again, buddy?
No, the listeners couldn't see my smile.
No, I had a great time tonight, man. I know that we had done a lot of talking about, like, because you've never done a podcast like this before, or no, not done one ever.
No.
This is your first one?
The closest thing I did, I was a talking head on a documentary that is yet to be released.
Did you say the F word?
No.
Oh, why is it not out yet?
Well, let's see. I think it was 2019 when they interviewed me.
So
And the guy told me it'd be a while, year or two. So maybe this year, maybe next year.
I mean, it's not like you didn't have a ton of time to edit it.
It's
Keep us posted, though.
yeah, it's
when that happens.
it's a multi-part series, I believe. It's on like the history of Washington County. It's being done through Antietam Cable or whatever they are, Antietam Media.
Yeah.
And that was cool, but yeah, definitely different than this, but kind of same vein. He asked me some questions, and I
love
talked
it,
a
man.
lot.
You're a natural. We've just did this twice, back-to-back quarters, where we had a guy who's never done this sort of medium of teaching and like is a natural. Like,
Exactly.
You sound good behind a mic, man. So we look forward to having you back here again.
I have a face for radio.
Me too, man. That's why I do this show.
So say we all.
Trifecta. So before we get out of here, you can follow the History Things podcast on Facebook and Instagram at the History Things podcast. You can follow Matt on social media at Matt Borders Books. That's his Instagram account. You can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at History Things with Pat. And as always, we encourage you guys to get involved with the show. Reach out with questions, comments, compliments, concerns if you have any. Hopefully you don't. Hopefully we've been keeping it light and doing a good job. But nonetheless, historythingspodcast@gmail.com is where you can reach out to us, or direct messages through our social medias. Obviously, if you hear something that you think we should elaborate on or need to correct or clarify, we had to do that for the first time in a while in our last episode, but we do encourage you to reach out for that. And we definitely, we're living in a world where, algorithms are a thing. So, if you're really liking what we're doing in the show and you're looking for ways to help us out, we would really appreciate it if you would give us a 5-star rating and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. It means a lot to us, just as much as you guys with every single download. And I will leave you with that as we start the second half of season 2. I'm humbled by how much this show has grown in a year plus. I am mystified by how much it seems you guys are enjoying that out there. So thank you so very much for hanging out with me and Matt every couple of weeks, and Matt and I, grammar English people out there, not English people, but English majors
Grammar
people.
yes.
Some guy with a badge that says grammar police on it is like, I'm done with this show, unsubscribe. But no, it does. It means literally everything to me personally, and I know it means a lot to Matt. So thank you guys so very much. Rob, thank you for spending a bunch of hours with us.
It's been great, buddy.
I've enjoyed it.
Absolutely. We look forward to having you back. So we're going to get out of here for tonight. Thank you for joining us for the first half of season 2. We hope you'd enjoyed it. Put your helmets on. I said this last year. Buckle up, baby. We're getting ready to go down the deep rabbit hole. We got something special coming up for you in just a couple of weeks. We got a follow-up with Rob Ambrose, and I am super excited because for the first time on the History Things podcast, we're going to take a focused look and trip to the Western Front. So just in a few short months in October, quarter 4, we're going to talk about Verdun. Matt's going to lead the way on that charge. So good luck leading the First World War charge, Matt. I'll see you. I'll write your loved ones, actually, because you're not making it out of that. But no, we have tons of great stuff coming up. And we look forward to seeing you again. So for our guest today, Rob Ambrose, for my co-host, Matt Borders, I'm your host, Pat McGuire, saying you've been listening to the History Things podcast. Thank you all very much. We'll see you later.
Have a good night.
Make sure to also follow Pat and Matt on their social medias at History Things with Pat and at Matt Borders Books. Have a question, comment, or compliment for the show? Send us an email at historythingspodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed the show.